Chapter 202. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she hurriedly ran out of the assembly hall like a stray dog. Just as she left the assembly hall, she bumped into Zhang Qingyue, who was holding a piece of paper. Zhang Qingyue stepped aside and looked at Zhang Xiaohua's hurried figure. He shook his head with a smile and walked into the assembly hall. Zhang Qingyue handed the paper to Ou Peng and said, "Master, this disciple was careless and made a mistake. Please punish me." Ou Peng took the paper and looked at it carefully. He rolled it into a ball and placed it in his palm. He circulated his internal energy and casually raised it. A pile of small paper shreds fell to the ground. Ou Peng looked at Zhang Qingyue's panicked expression and said, "Careless is careless, but it can't be considered a mistake. Even if this levitation technique was spread, no one would be able to learn it. It's fine, it's fine." Then he said, "Qingyue, you can go back first. I still have some things to discuss with your great martial uncle." Only then did Zhang Qingyue bow and leave. Seeing Zhang Qingyue walk out of the assembly hall, Hu Yunyi asked, "Junior brother, do you think what Zhang Xiaohua said just now was true?" Ou Peng smiled and said, 100% true." After organizing his thoughts, Ou Peng continued, "When Zhang Xiaohu first entered the Lotus Flower Escort Agency, they had already investigated. The two brothers had never left the Guizhuang house and had never learned any martial arts. They also didn't have the opportunity to obtain any secret martial arts manuals. Moreover, when Zhang Xiaohua and He Tianshu were practicing fist techniques, their aptitude was extremely poor. They had never learned any fist techniques. Yan told me all this before and I treated it as a joke. Unexpectedly, this fool has fool's luck and actually learned this Big Dipper magical fist." Hu Yunyi said thoughtfully, "But this Big Dipper magical fist only has 108 moves. It's not the 360 moves of the Dezhou Stellar Fist." Ou Peng said, "No one knows what the 360 moves of the Great Heavenly Stellar Fist are, but the 108 moves of the Big Dipper Magical Fist are right in front of us. Even if the Big Dipper Magical Fist isn't the Great Heavenly Stellar Fist, it matches the legend very well. It's okay to treat it as a part of the Great Heavenly Stellar Fist." Hu Yunyi nodded. "You can say that. However, the Big Dipper Mystical Fist is also a complete set. It's a little far-fetched to say that it's a part of other fist techniques." Ou Peng said, "Eldest senior brother, you're thinking too much. Who cares if it's the stellar fist of the Great Heavenly Cycle? No one has cared about it for thousands of years, so why should we care about it now? Moreover, haven't we already obtained the Big Dipper Divine Fist? Why would we still care so much?" Hu Yunyi nodded and said, "Junior apprentice brother is right." Then, Hu Yunyi asked, "Why didn't you take Zhang Xiaohua into our Misty School?" Ou Peng forced a smile and said, "That's what I thought at first. But after all, we've just taken in her second brother, which has already caused a certain amount of public opinion in the sect. If we take in another little brother, wouldn't it be even more controversial? Although we're not afraid of the disciples' discussion, after all, the rules of the Misty School for thousands of years have been broken again and again. It's not good for the development of the faction in the future. Last time, it was because she saved their lives, so it was understandable. This time, Zhang Xiaohua only won a competition in the Dalan Temple. If we take her in as a disciple, the other disciples will be disappointed. Don't think that the disciples are very good to Zhang Xiaohua today. If it affects their interests and their views, Zhang Xiaohua's days won't be easy." Ou Peng took a sip of tea and said, "Moreover, the Dalan Temple is watching us closely. After the competition, I told Shui Yupeng to hurry back to the Falling Water Gang. I'm afraid that something will happen there. If I suddenly take Zhang Xiaohua as a disciple of the Misty School, they will definitely suspect our motives. Maybe they will see some clues. Not to mention the Fist of the North Star, even if they cast their sights on Zhang Xiaohua's hometown, don't forget that the Guizhuang house where Zhang Xiaohua lives is not far from the Five Claws Peak. We have to be careful." Hu Yunyi nodded knowingly. Ou Peng said, "Moreover, this Zhang Xiaohua is under Yan Er's nose in the Huanxi Manor. What's the difference between being in the Misty School and being in the Huanxi Manor? Moreover, didn't you see that she wanted my token and wanted to go to the pharmacy hall to read books? What's the difference between her and being a disciple of the Misty School? If she becomes a disciple of the Misty School, won't she still be under He Tianchu's tutelage? There's really no difference. Hu Yuni nodded again and said, Junior brother's consideration is very thorough. Oh Peng sighed and said, hey, this is a special time. It's the time for our Misty School to accumulate strength. Everything must be done in a low-key manner. That's right, the matter of recording the Fist of the North Star must also be kept a secret. Don't let anyone leak the news. Hu Yuni said, I'll go out in a moment and tell Qingyu. Alright, junior brother, today's matter of the Dalan Temple disrupting our martial arts exhibition has also troubled you. Rest early. Oh Peng smiled and said, senior brother is also tired. You should also go back early. However, if it weren't for the Dalan Temple's provocation, the Zhang brothers wouldn't have shown themselves and we wouldn't have obtained the Fist of the North Star. It can be considered a blessing in disguise. Moreover, the Dalan Temple's monk Changgung didn't find out anything about us. We've also passed this hurdle. Killing two birds with one stone, killing two birds with one stone. The two Marshall brothers left the hall one after the other and returned to their respective rooms to rest. Zhang Xiaohua returned to Zhang Xiaohu's residence with satisfaction. He had reaped a bountiful harvest from the meeting hall this time. Not only had he obtained the token, but he would also be able to freely enter and exit the pharmacy hall. Presumably, his internal strength cultivation wouldn't be a problem in the future. In fact, what made him most excited was the 1,000 taels of silver. This was enough money for his parents to live a peaceful life. Thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but grin. He had only asked for 100 taels of silver, but the sect leader had actually given him 10,000 taels of gold. This really scared Zhang Xiaohua to death. Zhang Xiaohu wasn't in the small courtyard. He must have been taken away by Wen Wenhai to personally teach him secrets. For the past few days, Zhang Xiaohua had only practiced his fist techniques. He hadn't practiced his sword techniques with his left hand at all. At this time, this empty courtyard was the perfect place for Zhang Xiaohua to revise his sword techniques. However, things didn't go as he wished. Just as Zhang Xiaohua closed the small door and returned to the center of the courtyard, he heard someone rushing to the door. Pa, 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 pa. He loudly shouted, Zhang Xiaohua, is Zhang Xiaohua here? When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he couldn't help but stare blankly. Wasn't this Niaer's voice? Ever since this guy promised to teach him sword techniques, he had disappeared. Why did he suddenly run over to second brother's place to look for him today? Zhang Xiaohua heard Niaer's anxious voice and hurriedly ran over. He opened the door and smiled, Brother Niaer, why are you looking for me at this time? It's already so late. If you want to teach me sword techniques, you have to wait until tomorrow. When Niaer heard Zhang Xiaohua's words, he naturally thought of the matter of Zhang Xiaohua fooling around with his sword techniques. However, he just gritted his teeth and said, bad news, bad news. Zhang Xiaohua, quickly come back to Huanxi Manor with me. After that, he pulled Zhang Xiaohua's left hand and was about to run out. Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand and didn't follow him. Instead, his left hand exerted strength and pulled back. Therefore, Niaer ran out with all his strength, but Zhang Xiaohua was really like a rock and didn't move at all. Niaer saw that he couldn't pull him, so he simply let go and said anxiously, it's already come to this, why aren't you anxious? Zhang Xiaohua was at a loss and said, what's going on? If you don't tell me clearly, how would I know? Why would I be anxious? Niaer still said anxiously, it's hard to explain it clearly in a short time. You'd better go back to Huanxi Manor with me and tell me on the way. Zhang Xiaohua thought about it and decided that was the only way. On the way back to Huanxi Manor, Zhang Xiaohua finally understood the trouble. It turned out that since more than a month ago, Niaer and others had been preparing in the pharmacy hall. They wanted to get a good result in the martial arts exhibition and leave the herbal field of Huanxi Manor to Zhang Xiaohua. After the martial arts exhibition began, Zhang Xiaohua packed up the herbal field and also went to ethereal heights. However, Zhang Xiaohua left for a few days and no one took care of the herbal field. Today was the day when Ye returned to Huanxi Manor. They first cleaned up the house and casually went to the herbal field to have a look. They couldn't help but turn pale with fright. On the edge of the herbal field, not only was there a small grass shed, but the herbs in the field were all sick. Many of them were yellow and looked malnourished. There were not many weeds in the field and the soil was not dry. They really didn't know what happened to these herbs. Nye and others hurriedly cleared the weeds in the herbal field and watered the field. Then they looked at the herbs in a daze and worried. What should they do? Suddenly, they thought at the same time. What did this have to do with them? When they went back to the Misty School to prepare for the martial arts exhibition, everything in the herbal field was fine. When they came back, it became like this. If they were to be held responsible, they might not be the ones to bear the responsibility. However, Zhang Xiaohua was not a disciple of the pharmacy hall after all. He was only helping them in the herbal field. If they really asked him to bear the responsibility, he might not do it. However, the matter had already happened, so they had to call him back first. When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, he was also shocked. He said, "When I came out, it was still fine. I also watered it and cleaned up the weeds before leaving. These herbs don't need to be watered every day, and the weeds have been reduced a lot during this time. I thought it was just a few days in Misty Mountain Villa. How could there be a problem?" However, the days in Misty Mountain Villa were a few days longer than expected, but this shouldn't be a big problem. By the way, where is Captain He? Nye said, "I have asked them to look for him. This is a big problem. We have never seen it before. I don't know if Captain He can solve it." Hearing that something had happened in Huanxi Manor, Zhang Xiaohua didn't need Nye to urge him. He followed him closely and ran quickly to Huanxi Manor. When they arrived at Huanxi Manor, the sky was already dark. He Tianshu came back one step earlier. He was holding a torch and carefully looking at the herbs in the herbal field, frowning tightly. "Please collect, please reward, thank you." Chapter 203. Zhang Xiaohua cautiously moved forward and asked, "Captain He, what's going on?" He Tianshu didn't turn around and only sighed, "Take a look for yourself." "I don't know what's going on either." Zhang Xiaohua didn't rush forward and only said softly, "Captain He, it's all my fault. I only cared about participating in the martial arts exhibition and didn't take care of the medicinal field." He Tianshu turned back to look at Zhang Xiaohua and shook his head, "This can't be entirely your fault. After all, this medicinal field is under the care of our medicinal hall. You're only here to help. Moreover, to be honest, I've been too focused on preparing for the martial arts exhibition and neglected the medicinal field." Zhang Xiaohua felt even more guilty when she saw that He Tianshu didn't blame her. She then walked forward and stepped into the medicinal field. She squatted down and used the firelight to carefully observe the medicinal plants. Under the light of the fire, it was not very clear. However, he could still faintly see that the leaves of the herbs were a little dry, and the edges were yellow. Zhang Xiaohua read a lot of books, so he naturally thought that these symptoms were the symptoms of the herbs that were about to wither. Zhang Xiaohua was very puzzled. The withering of medicinal plants wasn't uncommon. According to the books, there would always be a portion of medicinal plants dying in every medicinal field. However, the problem was that these few medicinal fields in Huanxi Manor were carefully tended by them. Everything was normal before. How could such a thing happen in just a few short days? As for medicinal plants that showed signs of withering, according to the books, there was no way to save them. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua raised her head and asked, "Captain He, what do you think we should do about this? Do you have any good ideas?" He Tianshu shook his head and said, "For this kind of thing, no one has been able to do anything for thousands of years. How could I have any good ideas? Actually, we were already prepared for this kind of situation. However, the medicinal plants have been growing very well this year and I didn't find anything wrong with them. That's why I neglected it. Sigh. In a short while, Tianshu had used the word neglected twice. It looked like he still felt guilty about such a thing happening in the medicinal field. Zhang Xiaohua looked up at the pitch-black medicinal field and asked, "Little second brother, approximately how many medicinal herbs are showing signs of withering?" Nya Xiaoer said, 60% of them are like that. Ah! Zhang Xiaohua was a little surprised, and said, "Why is it so much? Isn't it usually 10% to 20%? Nya Xiaoer said, "That's right. Why else would we be so anxious?" Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua and asked, "You've been alone in the herbal field all this time. Think carefully. Is there anything unusual?" Zhang Xiaohua lowered her head and thought carefully for a long time. Then she said, "During this period of time, in order to cultivate my internal strength, I have been living in this straw shed. From morning to night, I have been by the medicinal field, but I have never noticed anything unusual. Everything is the same as when you were here." Tianshu frowned and said, "Think carefully again. There must be something different from before. Even if it has nothing to do with medicinal herbs, tell me." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and said, "If there's anything different, it's that the grass in the medicinal field is decreasing day by day. It's different from before. However, after a day of rain, there's a lot of grass again. However, after that, it starts to decrease again." Tianshu, Nya Xiaoer, and the others couldn't find anything strange. The things they learned from the pharmacy hall never talked about the relationship between grass and medicinal herbs. They only knew that weeding was the same. Zhang Xiaohua saw that they didn't speak and probed, "Captain He, is there a problem with the soil?" Tianshu shook his head and said, "No, this soil was all obtained from the pharmacy hall. Also, I just checked it. It's all normal and there's enough water." After thinking for a while, Zhang Xiaohua said, "Captain He, actually, I've wanted to ask you for a long time. I see that the symptoms of these medicinal herbs are similar to when our Guizhuang house's crops lack manure. We usually use manure as fertilizer for the crops. After a few days, it'll recover." Pfft. Not only Tianshu, but Nya Xiaoer and the others were also amused. Tianshu smiled and said, Zhang Xiaohua, do you think that these medicinal herbs are the same as your family's crops? The crops have fruits, so manure can be used to fertilize the soil. However, medicinal herbs can't be used. You've read so many books, have they ever mentioned using manure for medicinal herbs? Zhang Xiaohua shook her head a little awkwardly. Tianshu said again, "You've read so many books, it's true that you can comprehend by analogy, but it doesn't mean that all experience can be used at will. If you use manure in the medicinal field, see if Elder He won't hang you up and beat you." Everyone also roared with laughter. Zhang Xiaohua scratched her head and said, "I'm just giving you guys some ideas. Also, when I left Huanxi Manor, there really wasn't any abnormality in the medicinal field." Tianshu smiled and said, "We know. If there was the slightest abnormality in the medicinal field, you would have told us earlier. You wouldn't have participated in the Yanwu University. We're all very clear on this point. However, 60% of these medicinal herbs are about to wither. There must be something fishy about this. Let's wait until tomorrow to report to the pharmacy hall and ask the elders to make a decision. I think it'll be difficult for us to escape the charge of negligence." Zhang Xiaohua was greatly alarmed and said, "Isn't that bad? What kind of punishment will there be?" Tianshu patted her shoulder and said, "Don't worry, the cause of this matter hasn't been figured out yet. It may not be our responsibility. However, even if the charge is confirmed, it's not just a few months of punishment, or a few months of confinement." Zhang Xiaohua finally relaxed and said, "That's not bad, I thought we would be expelled from the sect." Tianshu and the others all glared angrily, saying, "Isn't it just a few more withered medicinal herbs? It happens more or less every year. It's just that this time, too many of us have withered. You actually want to expel us from the sect, this idea is really hateful." After saying that, everyone wanted to raise their fists and punch Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly begged for mercy, but the others didn't listen. Nya Xiao looked at the straw hut next to them and said, "How about this? If Zhang Xiaohua wants our forgiveness, then tonight you'll be on duty in this straw hut and take good care of the medicinal field. If you can find the cause of the withered medicinal herbs, we'll let you go." Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "There's no problem with being on duty, but finding the cause will be difficult. It's not even recorded in the books, where can I find it?" Nya Xiao and the others didn't listen and said, "You just have to be on duty here and see if there's any opportunity." Zhang Xiaohua thought about it. In any case, before she went to the Misty Mountain Villa to participate in the martial arts exhibition, she had spent the night in this straw hut. Since she had just returned, there was nothing wrong with staying here, so she nodded. He Tianshu smiled and said, "No need, they're all tricking you, don't take it seriously." At this time, Zhang Xiaohua became stubborn. Something like this had happened to the medicinal field, most of it was because she didn't take good care of it. If she could be on duty for a night, she could also calm the guilt in her heart. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was determined to stay, He Tianshu didn't force her. He knew that this guy could still practice when he was on duty. Presumably, if he was on duty as soon as he came back, it would also be a superficial apology. Seeing that it was already late, He Tianshu said a few words and brought Nya Xiao and the others back to the small courtyard. After He Tianshu and the others walked away, Zhang Xiaohua looked around the entire medicinal field. Sure enough, as Nya Xiao said, most of the medicinal herbs were dying. The edges of the leaves were more or less yellow. Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. When she was here, there was no abnormality at all. She had only left for a few days, how could such a big change happen? Standing in the medicinal field for a long time, she didn't have any clue. She could only return to the straw hut and carefully recall the scene of her taking care of the medicinal field for a month. She still couldn't find anything wrong. At this time, it was already late at night. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged and used the inner strength of the Carefree Heart Sutra to sense the qi of heaven and earth in the outside world. She prepared to draw the qi into her body and refine her meridians. But when she sent out her senses, she was surprised to find that the qi of heaven and earth in the medicinal field seemed to have decreased by a lot. It was far less than before. It felt like it had decreased by as much as 50%. Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. He had only been away for a few days, how could the environment have changed so much? But fortunately, there was still qi here. It was better than the forest, wasn't it? Thus, Zhang Xiaohua calmed her heart and drew the qi into her body. But when a few strands of qi were drawn into her body, she suddenly thought of something. Her heart shook. Oh my, could it be that the culprit behind the withering of the medicinal herbs in the medicinal field was really herself? Just as she was thinking, it was already midnight. Zhang Xiaohua fell asleep on time. The first level of the Carefree Heart Sutra automatically operated. Zhang Xiaohua's body shone inexplicably. Obscure waves, endless star power, and the only remaining qi of heaven and earth in the night sky were all greedily drawn into her body. The qi of heaven and earth and star power were all absorbed by her countless pores. After being refined, they merged into the fine, barely perceptible qi. The night was silent. It wasn't until the sun rose over the horizon that Zhang Xiaohua suddenly opened his eyes. Although it was a very cloudy day, Zhang Xiaohua took a deep breath and could still feel that bit of essence entering her body. When Zhang Xiaohua stood up and walked out of the straw hut, she carefully looked at the entire medicinal field again. She didn't know if it was because it was dark last night and she couldn't see clearly, or because she had drawn the qi into her body last night, but the withered state of the medicinal herbs seemed to have worsened. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but sigh. This desolation was really caused by her. Although it was unintentional, it was still a fact. How was she going to explain to He Tianshu? If she didn't find out when she was cultivating yesterday that the qi of heaven and earth that the medicinal herbs needed to grow was the qi of heaven and earth that she used to draw qi, she wouldn't have any psychological burden. But last night, she clearly remembered that the qi of heaven and earth that was flowing downwards was originally drawn from the medicinal herbs in the medicinal field. But it was snatched by her own grass and drawn into her body. It was because she snatched the qi of heaven and earth that the medicinal herbs needed to grow that caused the medicinal herbs to wither. No matter what angle she looked at it from, she couldn't deny it. Chapter 204. Zhang Xiaohua would never shirk the responsibility. But if Zhang Xiaohua were to bear this responsibility, he would hesitate as well. Not to mention the information that Zhang Xiaohua had obtained from her indirect questioning, the cultivation method of her internal strength was very different from He Tianshu and the rest. How could she explain to them the cause of the medicinal herbs dying? Moreover, even if she was brave enough to bear the responsibility, would He Tianshu and the rest really think that it was Zhang Xiaohua's responsibility, and not a reason that Zhang Xiaohua had fabricated to shirk the responsibility for them? These were all secondary. The most important thing was that Zhang Xiaohua felt that she did not have the ability to bear the consequences of this mistake. The 1,000 taels of silver that she had just received did not seem to be enough to compensate for these medicinal herbs. Thinking that the silver would grow wings and fly away, Zhang Xiaohua felt a pang of pain in her heart. However, if He Tianshu and the rest were to be severely punished by the pharmacy hall because of her unintentional mistake, that was not something that Zhang Xiaohua was willing to see. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua's heart was extremely tangled. However, seeing that the sun had already risen high and He Tianshu and the rest did not come over, Zhang Xiaohua felt that it was very strange. The medicinal herbs in the medicinal field had already withered to such a state, why were they not concerned? Weren't they still panicking yesterday? Why did their temperament change after the autumn festival? Zhang Xiaohua quickly walked back to the courtyard and knocked on the doors of each house, but there was no response. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua was puzzled. They had all disappeared so early in the morning, what were they doing? However, after thinking for a while, she knew the answer. To be able to make them disappear collectively, other than the medicinal herbs in the medicinal field, what else could it be? If they were not in the medicinal field, then they must have gone to the pharmacy hall. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but sigh. This was really a difficult matter. As Zhang Xiaohua walked back, he was racking his brains to think and recall. At this moment, he realized that although he had read many ancient books about medicinal herbs, these books all recorded how to plant the herbs best, and also recorded the medicinal properties of the herbs. However, they did not mention how the herbs grew. Just like planting crops, how to fertilize them. This could not be said to be a very strange matter. Moreover, the term Qi of Heaven and Earth was only recorded in the Carefree Heart Sutra. Other boxing manuals and ancient books about medicinal herbs were not involved. Instead, there were some vague words in the books that Li Jinfeng occasionally used to amuse him. Zhang Xiaohua came to the side of the field absent-mindedly and sat cross-legged in the straw hut. If it were any other time, he would have already circulated his qi. He quite liked the feeling of drawing qi and refining it. It was like playing with a toy. The more he worked, the more exquisite it would be. Unfortunately, he was not in the mood now. It was strange that his mood swings directly affected the Carefree Heart Sutra. It was very difficult to enter that peaceful, thoughtless state of mind. Without this state of mind, it was also very difficult for him to adjust the frequency of his breathing and release his perception. Zhang Xiaohua spent the whole morning in a dilemma. One moment, he was determined to stand up bravely and admit that he had made a big mistake. The next moment, he shrank back and found excuses for himself. In short, it was almost noon, but he still had not made up his mind. Just as he was having a new round of conflict between good and evil in his heart, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly heard a group of footsteps approaching the herb field. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly stood up, thinking that it must be the people from the pharmacy hall. But when he looked up, he only saw He Tianshu and the other 4 people. There was not a single unfamiliar face. Looking from afar, He Tianshu and the others did not look as depressed as he imagined. Naturally, they did not look relaxed either. Zhang Xiaohua was very curious. Could it be that they were not punished by the pharmacy hall? Without waiting for He Tianshu and the others to come closer, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly ran up to them. The first thing he said was, "Captain He, I think it's all my fault." But before he could finish speaking, He Tianshu waved his hand and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, didn't I say before that this matter is everyone's problem? Don't take the responsibility just because you were the only one taking care of the herb field. That's really meaningless. We all know that you worked hard. If we can't share the pain now, how can we still be considered disciples of the Misty School?" This. Zhang Xiaohua opened his mouth, but couldn't say a word. Then, Zhang Xiaohua asked again, "Captain He, where did you go this morning? Did you go back to the pharmacy hall?" He Tianshu looked a little worriedly at the herb field that had turned yellow and withered. He nodded silently. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to ask any more. After a while, he finally couldn't hold it in and asked tentatively, "Captain He, what punishment did you receive?" He Tianshu didn't say anything. Nia Xiao'er beside him said with a heavy expression, "It's really unexpected. It's hard to explain in a few words. I think." Halfway through his sentence, he sighed deeply and squatted down. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and asked anxiously, "Don't tell me." Nia Xiao'er held his head and said, "Yes, exactly. I really didn't expect it." Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded and said, "Didn't you say yesterday that at most you would be grounded for a few months and forfeited a few months of salary? How did it suddenly become expulsion today?" Nia Xiao'er said earnestly, "Yes, the affairs of the world are unpredictable. Who knows what will happen in the next moment?" Zhang Xiaohua was about to console him sorrowfully. He heard He Tianshu laugh and scold him, "What nonsense are you saying? Zhang Xiaohua, don't think too much and don't listen to Xiao'er's nonsense." Nia Xiao'er jumped up from the ground and said, "Captain He, listen to me. I didn't say a word of nonsense. It was all Zhang Xiaohua who said it." Zhang Xiaohua looked at the two strangely and didn't understand, "What's going on? Didn't your hall master scold you?" He Tianshu shook his head and said, "Things don't seem to be as serious as we thought. We discussed yesterday and went to the medicine hall early in the morning to ask for punishment. We tried to take the initiative and be lenient if we were honest. Who knew that hall master Bai wasn't here and elder he was also absent-minded. He seemed to be busy with something. After hearing our report, he waved his hand and told us to come back first. He said that he wanted us to observe first and come to Huanxi Manor when he had time." Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded and said, "These herbs are dying. Will elder he be able to see them when he comes in a few days?" "Yes, that's what I said too." He Tianshu said helplessly, "But elder he said that he had more important things to do and didn't have any time. He also said that he wanted us to find the cause and see if we can save them." "I see." Zhang Xiaohua said thoughtfully, "That is to say, even if the herbs in this medicine field die, you won't be punished severely?" He Tianshu smiled and said, "It seems so. Maybe it's just a monthly fine." Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua felt a big stone in her heart fall to the ground. Well, she was anxious for half a day in the morning. It seemed that the medicine hall didn't care at all. Well, it saved her the trouble of standing up. He Tianshu and the others patrolled the medicine field for a moment and looked at the withered and yellow plants, but they still couldn't do anything. In fact, the punishment in the medicine hall was secondary. The key was that they were in charge of cultivating herbs and making medicine. They couldn't accept that the herbs they were so proud of had become like this. They always wanted to find a way to save these herbs. Everyone looked and discussed carefully, but there was still no way. Then they called Zhang Xiaohua to go back to the small courtyard. Zhang Xiaohua hadn't been back to the cottage for a long time and was too lazy to go back now. After walking halfway, she wanted to go to the forest to practice martial arts and parted ways with He Tianshu and the others. Ever since Zhang Xiaohua found the feeling of the levitation technique in the arena, she had always wanted to find a chance to experience it. Wasn't this a good time to practice martial arts in the afternoon? In the forest, Zhang Xiaohua hadn't come for a few days, but the scenery was still the same. Today was a cloudy day. Although it was just past noon, there was no sunlight at all. Thick clouds blocked the sky and it was very gloomy. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged under a tree. First, she carefully comprehended the details and main points of the levitation technique in her heart. Then, she repeatedly thought about the experience of using Qinggong twice in the arena. Only then did she float up and practice Qinggong for the first time. The practice of Qinggong was indeed based on talent. She heard from He Tianshu that as long as one's inner strength reached a certain level, Qinggong was just a technique. As long as one used their inner strength, they could make their body as light as a swallow. It was a pity that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't someone with extraordinary talent. The levitation technique of the ethereal steps was explained in detail. Moreover, he had indeed used it twice, but he was still unable to make his body move an inch from the ground. After trying it countless times, Zhang Xiaohua reluctantly gave up. Because the sky was filled with dark clouds and there were faint scenes of lightning and thunder. In order to not become a drowned rat, he could only rush back to the hut early. Indeed, after he returned to the hut, before he could tidy up the things in the hut, bean-sized raindrops began to fall with pitter-patter sounds. Zhang Xiaohua listened to the distant thunder and the rhythm of the rain hitting the banana leaves. He couldn't help but secretly rejoice that he had returned early. But before the rejoicing mood had passed, Zhang Xiaohua's mind suddenly had a flash of lightning. His hands that were tidying up his things suddenly stopped. Because he suddenly thought of a method to treat the yellowing of the medicinal herbs. Chapter 205. When Zhang Xiaohua heard the thunderclaps, he suddenly thought back to the time when he had been practicing cultivation in the thatched hut in the medicinal plant field. That rainy night, the thunderclaps that seemed to have struck his heart. Then, he thought back to the day when the medicinal plant field was filled with lush green weeds. He even thought back to the minute bits of true energy that had formed in his meridians. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua immediately stopped tidying up, pushed open the door, and ran out, completely ignoring the rain that drenched him. When he ran to the herb field and hurriedly hid in the straw shed, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but smile bitterly and shake his head. He had just run back to the cottage from the forest because he was afraid of being drenched by the rain. In the end, he still could not escape the fate of being drenched. Zhang Xiaohua did not bother to wipe the rain off his body. He sat down cross-legged and prepared to draw the vital qi into his body. However, when he sat down and calmed down, he hesitated again. Zhang Xiaohua still had lingering fears about the feeling of being struck by the heavenly thunder when he drew the vital qi. That was a kind of impact on the soul. It was an indescribable feeling. Fortunately, he happened to be asleep at that time. If he was still awake, he really did not know what the consequences would be. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua stopped practicing and hesitated again. Judging from the reaction of He Tianshu and the others when they returned to the pharmacy hall, the withering and yellowing of the herbs did not seem to be as serious as they or he had imagined. Was it necessary for him to take this risk? If he overreached himself and was struck by the heavenly thunder, it would lead to bad consequences. Then, who would know of his painstaking efforts? However, Zhang Xiaohua immediately thought that regardless of whether the withering and yellowing of the herbs was serious or not, it was, after all, the consequence of snatching food from the grass. It was caused by him. If he ignored it, He Tianshu and the others would be punished by the pharmacy hall. Based on his conscience alone, he would not be able to live with it. Perhaps years later, when he thought of this, he would also regret not making the right choice. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes gradually became serious. Looking at the rain outside the straw hut, he became more and more determined. He finally made a choice without any regrets. Holding his breath and calming his heart, he drew qi into his body according to the first level of the Carefree Heart Sutra. The moment Zhang Xiaohua drew her qi, his heart suddenly relaxed, as if a layer of shackles had been removed. Zhang Xiaohua's state of mind had not only matured, but also improved by a level. The tempering of one's state of mind was complementary to the cultivation of the mental cultivation method. However, the cultivation of the mental cultivation method could be written in words and could become a rule. However, the tempering of one's state of mind depended solely on oneself. Everyone had different encounters and different experiences. The tempering of one's state of mind was also different. Generally, when a master and disciple imparted a mental cultivation method to their disciple, they would often pass on the secrets and key points of the cultivation of the mental cultivation method. Only then would the cultivation of the mental cultivation method be able to step into a normal virtuous cycle. Zhang Xiaohua had only obtained the Carefree Heart Sutra by chance. He pondered and walked forward. How could he know these digressions recorded in the Carefree Heart Sutra? He only felt that his heart was very relaxed now, as if he was flying. How could he think of so many reasons? How could he have known that he had taken another huge step forward? Zhang Xiaohua's state of mind was determined. However, the release of his perception was probing. It spread out bit by bit. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth outside the medicinal field was still pitifully little, not much different from the last time. However, although there was a lot of rain now, there were very few heavenly thunders in the vicinity. They all sounded in the vicinity. Zhang Xiaohua instantly felt that the distant thunder could not quench the present thirst. However, he did not have the remarkable ability to directly draw the heavenly thunders over. He could only obediently draw the spiritual energy in the vicinity of the medicinal field into his body, hoping that he could also slowly draw the heavenly thunders over. Actually, even at this step, Zhang Xiaohua still held an attitude of giving it a try. He resolutely did this matter. He did not know the relationship between the heavenly thunders and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. He also could not guarantee that drawing the heavenly thunders over would definitely attract enough spiritual energy of heaven and earth to revive the withered and yellow medicinal herbs. However, he knew that this was the only way he could possibly save these medicinal herbs. If he did not do this, these herbalists would definitely wither and die. Time passed bit by bit. Zhang Xiaohua also drew the spiritual energy of heaven and earth into his body bit by bit. The spiritual energy entering his body was still very subtle and imperceptible. Following the circulation of the vital energy in his meridians, Zhang Xiaohua could faintly feel his own progress. However, this progress was not what Zhang Xiaohua hoped for. He slowly became a little anxious. He did not want to draw the spiritual energy into his body. If it continued like this tonight, wouldn't it go against his original intention? Just as he was thinking, a faint sound of thunder sounded from the horizon. Although it was still extremely far away, this sound of thunder was different from others. This sound of thunder was extremely far away and somewhat faintly discernible. However, the sound of large and small pearls falling on a jade plate could not be masked in the slightest. It was as if it was hitting Zhang Xiaohua's heart. He could not help but be moved in his heart and secretly said, "Could it be that the heavenly thunders have been attracted to me?" Sure enough, the continuous sound of thunder sounded, as if it was beating the drum in Zhang Xiaohua's heart. It was getting closer and closer. However, when the anticipated sound of thunder sounded, Zhang Xiaohua's heart became even more perturbed. Last time, he was only struck by the heavenly thunders before he slept. This time, if he did not sleep in time, what would it be like? Zhang Xiaohua almost wanted to stop drawing the spiritual energy. However, calculating the time, it was already close to midnight. If he stopped now, he might fall asleep in a while. How could he still draw the spiritual energy into his body? How could he still attract the heavenly thunders? Moreover, if he did not succeed today, would it be rainy tomorrow or the day after? Would he still have a chance? A pile of unknowns made Zhang Xiaohua not dare to stop. Time was the answer to all questions. When the last explosion of the heavenly thunders sounded in the sky above the medicinal field, along with the appearance of the lightning, the explosive energy streaked across the sky. The energy was full of exuberant vitality. At the intersection of the energy and the air, rich spiritual energy of heaven and earth suddenly appeared. If that rich spiritual energy of heaven and earth was on a normal day, it would have already diffused between heaven and earth. However, at this time, Zhang Xiaohua, who was beside the medicinal field, was using all his strength to draw the spiritual energy. Although the newly generated spiritual energy in the sky was far away from him, there was still a subtle tendency to drive the newly born and tyrannical spiritual energy to rush in the direction of the medicinal field. As a result, an astonishing scene appeared once again. Endless spiritual energy poured into Zhang Xiaohua's pores like a raging bull. There was not the slightest bit of protective feelings for the fairer sex. Zhang Xiaohua's body, which was not afraid of even acupoint sealing, was instantly filled with blood. It was the blood that seeped out of his pores when they were broken. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua truly experienced for the first time what the Carefree Heart Sutra described, between heaven and earth, the inexhaustible and diffused primordial qi. However, this primordial qi did not need to be drawn by him anymore. It was as if they had found a home, and they swarmed in without any order. The primordial qi of heaven and earth that poured into his body was also not like before, fine and undetectable. From fine, to flowing streams, and then to surging torrents, Zhang Xiaohua's state of mind also changed from doubt to understanding, and then to panic. When the primordial qi of heaven and earth flowed like a flowing stream, Zhang Xiaohua finally understood that the Carefree Heart Sutra was not an ordinary record. He could deeply experience all the descriptions in it, including the inexhaustible primordial qi, the route it took to enter the body, the gathering of primordial qi, the tempering of primordial qi, and so on. However, when the primordial qi surged like a torrent, Zhang Xiaohua was extremely panicked. This was a state of losing control. The primordial qi flowed in disorderly, and it was not only his pores that burst, but also more and more primordial qi that gathered and rushed into his already stabilized meridians. Although his meridians had already burst and repaired when he was not aware of it, in front of an even greater amount of primordial qi this time, they could not withstand a single blow, and immediately broke inch by inch. While Zhang Xiaohua endured the heart-wrenching pain in his body, he sighed in his heart, "Is this a state even crazier than qi deviation?" After the panic, it seemed that the cultivation of the state of mind had taken another step forward. A wave of emptiness and tranquility rose in Zhang Xiaohua's heart, forming a stark contrast with the pain of his body. What was the use of seeking benevolence and obtaining benevolence? He had already chosen this path, and although the consequences were not what he wanted, but it was already near, so what was the use of panic? His life might have come to an end today, but he did not know if the herbs in the medicine field outside were nourished by primordial qi at this time. Unfortunately, Zhang Xiaohua had no time to pay attention to other things. He only felt his eyes darken, and then he lost consciousness. He did not know if it was because of the pain that caused him to faint, or if it was because of the arrival of midnight that he was as tranquil as a dream. In short, the flickering that was like breathing, unseen by the naked eye, enveloped his entire body, resonating with the stars in the sky. Endless starlight shone all around him, forming a thin film of light on Zhang Xiaohua's body. The starlight was like the previous rainy night, filtering out the tyrannical primordial qi. On one hand, it repaired the completely damaged meridians, and on the other hand, it guided the vitality into the mysterious depths of his mind. Everything went from disorder to order, gradually entering a path that Zhang Xiaohua did not know. Not to mention Zhang Xiaohua in the straw hut, at this time, in the small courtyard, He Tianshu was also unusually depressed. Before nightfall, He Tianshu tossed and turned in bed because of the yellowing of the herbs, unable to fall asleep, so he went to find Zhang Xiaohua to ask about the situation. However, Zhang Xiaohua's house was lit, and there was no sign of her. He was very puzzled, and waited for a long time, but no one came back. He Tianshu occasionally thought of the straw hut by the side of the medicine field, but looking at the incessant rain outside, and the faint sound of thunder in the sky, he immediately rejected the idea of Zhang Xiaohua going to the straw hut. It was not until late at night when the sound of thunder increased that he returned to his own house. Usually, He Tianshu rarely slept, and would use internal energy to replace sleep. However, today was different. A normal rainy night or night with thunder was not conducive to internal energy cultivation, and the roaring thunder was extremely easy to cause a person to go astray. He Tianshu did not want to go to the underworld because of a moment of loneliness, so he forced himself to close his eyes and sleep. However, this night was destined to be an extraordinary night. He Tianshu felt that the thunder that filled the sky seemed to be right above his head, rolling non-stop, and only faintly fading when the sky was close to dawn. Chapter 206. After the sound of thunder faded away, He Tianshu, whose heart was palpitating with fear, slowly fell asleep. There were many people who didn't fall asleep in the small courtyard. There were also many people who didn't fall asleep in the entire Huanxi manor. Even in the Misty Manor, there were many people who didn't fall asleep. They all seemed to be thinking in their hearts, which unlucky fellow had done something bad to attract the heavenly thunder for the entire night? Even if it was an immortal, would he also be struck to pieces? The sound of thunder faded away, but the rain didn't have the slightest sign of stopping. The sky was covered by dark clouds, and not a trace of sunlight could be seen. However, Zhang Xiaohua, who was in the straw hut, suddenly opened her eyes. That trace of light in her deep eyes flashed and disappeared without a trace. When Zhang Xiaohua woke up, she was first at a loss. Following which, she was pleasantly surprised. Feeling her entire body with both hands, she didn't find any missing parts. Then, as if she had thought of something, she immediately rushed out of the straw hut, completely ignoring the rain that filled the sky. Facing the faint light of dawn, everything in the medicine field was already clear in her eyes. Her eyes were filled with emerald green, mixed with a little bit of withered yellow. The scene that she was used to seeing looked exceptionally beautiful at this moment. For a moment, Zhang Xiaohua actually stood in the rain, letting the rain pour over her head and body. Her face was even more wet. She didn't know if it was all the rain. Or was it Zhang Xiaohua's tears? In short, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were wet and her nose was sour. This night, she didn't work in vain. After a long while, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't be bothered to recall the danger of last night. She immediately rose from the ground and ran towards the small courtyard. There was a distance from the medicine field to the small courtyard. That small path had been washed by the rain for the entire night and was rather muddy. After running a few steps, Zhang Xiaohua's feet were full of mud and she almost fell. Hence, she unknowingly used the ethereal steps. The levitation technique had an immediate effect and actually pulled Zhang Xiaohua up a little from the ground. Then, using the ethereal steps technique, Zhang Xiaohua nimbly flew towards the small courtyard like a swallow. Fortunately, it was still early in the morning. Everyone had been disturbed by the thunder and lightning throughout the night. They were currently catching up on their sleep, and no one had woken up so early. Otherwise, they would have been shocked by Zhang Xiaohua's profound qinggong. When Zhang Xiaohua arrived at the courtyard, he immediately ran to He Tianshu's door and banged on it. He shouted, Captain He, the herbs are alive. The herbs are alive. In the small house, He Tianshu was still in a daze when he suddenly heard someone shouting, the herb is alive. First, he was shocked. Then, he was overjoyed. But soon after, he looked into the dim little house and laughed at himself, don't tell me I'm dreaming. What I think of in the day is also a dream. How can that herb be alive? He Tianshu turned over and was about to regroup and look for Zhou Gong when the door of the small house shook. Zhang Xiaohua's familiar voice sounded again, Captain He, the herb is alive. This time, He Tianshu really believed that he wasn't dreaming. He hurriedly rolled out of bed and jumped to the door. When he opened the door, he saw a drenched Zhang Xiaohua. She was covered in water and there were traces of blood on her body and clothes. He Tianshu anxiously asked, Zhang Xiaohua, what happened to you? Where did you go? You're covered in rain. Also, why is there a red color here? Is it blood? Then, he actually sniffed a few times and said, where did the stench come from? Looking for the source of the stench, He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua suspiciously. Zhang Xiaohua was about to tell He Tianshu about the herbs, but when he heard He Tianshu say that there were traces of blood and a stench on his body, he hurriedly looked down. Yes, there were a few traces of red on his cuffs. Looking carefully, the rainwater dripping down his hands and feet also had a faint red color. However, at this time, the sky was still dark, so he couldn't see clearly. Zhang Xiaohua thought of the stinging pain on his body before he fell asleep last night. He must have been injured last night. He raised his sleeve to his nose and smelled it. It really did have a fishy smell. She rolled her eyes and smiled. It's nothing, Captain He. Maybe I fell on the road and scraped myself. I don't have any smell on my body. Is your nose broken? Then, she quickly changed the topic and said, Captain He, good news. Most of the herbs in the herb field are alive. There are also a few that are yellow and withered. When He Tianshu heard this, he didn't care about anything else and said in astonishment, Really? That's impossible. At this time, Nya Xiao, and the others who were awakened by Zhang Xiaohua's thunderous banging on the door also put on their clothes and walked out. They all heard Zhang Xiaohua's shocking news. They also looked at He Tianshu with an expression that said, Don't lie to me, I won't believe you. Zhang Xiaohua saw that no one believed her and anxiously pulled on He Tianshu's clothes and said, You guys don't believe me? Let's go. Why don't you follow me to the herb field to see? He Tianshu was also anxious and was about to run into the rain when Nye Xiao, pulled him back and said, Captain He, umbrella, umbrella. Only then did He Tianshu wake up. Everyone went back to get umbrellas and quickly walked out of the house. He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua's sorry state and said with a smile, Zhang Xiaohua, look at you. Hurry and go wash up and change your clothes. You don't know how to use internal energy and your body is still weak. Be careful not to catch a cold. You don't need to follow us. The herbs are already alive. You've also just seen them. You can go later. Zhang Xiaohua thought about it and agreed. She was covered in rain and might even have blood stains on her body. It wasn't a good idea to follow them. Thus, after He Tianshu and the others went out with umbrellas, she quickly went back to the house to get an umbrella and clean clothes and went outside to wash up. When Zhang Xiaohua was washing up, she found that her body was covered in a thin blood cocoon. It had already solidified. After being washed by the rain, a lot of it fell off her body and stuck to her clothes or flowed along the rain to the ground. There were also black things in the blood cocoon that gave off a fishy smell. The smell made people want to vomit. However, she didn't find any injuries on her body. Pure white and flawless. Zhang Xiaohua was very surprised. Yesterday's stinging pain was clearly on the surface of her body. Could it be that after a night, it had completely healed? Or was her feeling wrong and it was purely an internal injury? However, with Zhang Xiaohua's current level of internal energy cultivation, if she wanted to check her meridians, she still had to sit cross-legged and circulate her energy. When she washed up, it was better to just wash up. The other fishy smell that made He Tianshu suspicious actually appeared on Zhang Xiaohua's body as early as when they were in the Guizhuang house. However, it was only a little and the smell wasn't this strong. Zhang Xiaohua only thought that she was sweating a lot because she was tired from daily work. Today, it appeared 10 times more and gave Zhang Xiaohua a reminder. A phrase immediately flashed in Zhang Xiaohua's mind, cleansing the body and cleansing the marrow. Wasn't this a phrase that she had just seen in the 4th layer of the Carefree Heart Sutra? It seemed that when the Carefree Heart Sutra was cultivated to the 4th layer, it would have the effect of cleansing the body and cleansing the impurities in the cultivator's body. She had just started cultivating, so how could she cleanse the body and cleanse the marrow? Moreover, what was the deal with that slight fishy smell in the past? Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua felt that there were many things about her that she couldn't understand. In the past, she didn't care and was too lazy to think about it, but now that more and more things were happening, she had no choice but to re-examine herself. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua noticed the wide black bracelet on her left wrist. It had been a long time since she left the Guizhuang house, and Zhang Xiaohua was no longer the lost and ignorant youth from before. She already had a deep understanding of the world and the ways of the world, not to mention something as common as a bracelet. Zhang Xiaohua gently took off the bracelet from her wrist. This bracelet was more than twice as wide as a normal bracelet, but it was extremely thin and dark. When she looked at it carefully, she could almost get lost in it. When she turned it slightly, she could actually see a trace of starlight in it. But what time was it? When Zhang Xiaohua looked up, the entire room was sealed and filled with water vapor. How could there be any light coming in? After looking at it for a long time, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't see anything special about it. This bracelet had been on her wrist for so long that she had long forgotten about it, treating it as a part of her arm. Now that she thought about it, many inexplicable things that had happened to her seemed to be related to this bracelet. And these inexplicable things were extremely beneficial to her. Since they were beneficial to her, why should she delve into it? Time was the answer to all questions. Presumably, at some point in time, even if she didn't want to know, the secret of this bracelet would appear in front of her. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua sighed and put the bracelet back on her left hand. Just as she put it on, she seemed to feel that something was wrong. She took it off again, but still felt that something was wrong, so she put it on again. After doing this for a while, Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up. She finally found out what was wrong. The bracelet could actually retract by itself. When she put it on her wrist, it would shrink to the same thickness as her wrist. It was just right for her to wear, so she didn't feel like she was moving up and down. Moreover, the bracelet was so light that it was almost weightless. It was the same as not wearing it at all. Moreover, when the bracelet was taken off her wrist, it would automatically become thicker, just enough for her palm to pass through. At this time, no matter how stupid Zhang Xiaohua was and how she couldn't be sure that the bracelet was related to the changes in her body, there was one thing that she was absolutely certain of: this bracelet was definitely not ordinary. Thinking about how extraordinary the bracelet was, Zhang Xiaohua immediately thought of an old saying: an ordinary man's wealth is his own ruin by causing others greed. This was what Lu Qian, Li Jinfeng and the rest, as well as He Tianshu, had told her. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't be bothered to wash up at this time. She carefully thought about everything that had happened since she got the bracelet. It seemed that other than her parents, eldest brother and second brother, no one else knew that she had such a bracelet. Even her parents thought that she had thrown away this little toy long ago. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua was slightly relieved. Chapter 207. Now that she knew how precious the bracelet was, Zhang Xiaohua didn't intend to keep it. It would have a magical effect if she wore it close to her body. Who knew if there would be any abnormalities if it left her body? Besides, it was obvious that it was better to wear this kind of thing with a rough appearance. No one would think that their most precious thing was so simple to wear on their wrist. After Zhang Xiaohua cleaned up, the longest washing was finally over. After putting on his clothes, Zhang Xiaohua reluctantly threw away the clothes that were not old and tattered, but were stained with blood and smelly. He had already tried to clean his house in a simple manner, but the black stains could not be washed away no matter how hard he washed them. He could only reluctantly part with them. When Zhang Xiaohua returned to the small courtyard, the rain didn't lessen at all. He Tianshu and the others hadn't come back yet. Zhang Xiaohua was amused. Yesterday, they said that it didn't matter. In fact, they all felt aggrieved in their hearts and felt that they didn't do their best. Today, when they heard that the herbs were alive again, they were probably reluctant to leave the medicine field. Sure enough, when Zhang Xiaohua returned to the medicine field, He Tianshu and the others all held umbrellas and stood beside the medicine field, laughing and gesticulating. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua come back, He Tianshu asked with a smile, "Zhang Xiaohua, where did you go last night? Don't tell me that he's really staying alone in the hut beside the medicinal field." Zhang Xiaohua nodded slightly and said, "Yes, Captain He. I feel that the withering of the herbs has a lot to do with me, so I feel uncomfortable if I don't stay by the side." Hearing that, everyone was moved. Nya said, "The thunder was incessant last night, and it was right above our Huanqi mountain villa. Weren't you afraid at all?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "I was very afraid at the beginning, but I got used to it." Although He Tianshu knew that Zhang Xiaohua had a bad habit of sleeping soundly at night, he was touched by her mood to stay by the field alone on such a rainy night, even if it did not help the revival of the herbs. He Tianshu frowned slightly and asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, you've been keeping watch for a whole night. Do you know how this herb was saved?" Of course, Zhang Xiaohua wouldn't tell him the truth. She pretended to rack her brains and said, "Captain He, I really don't know. You also know that the rain last night was very heavy. Before the rain, I looked at the medicinal field and saw that nothing had changed. Everything was yellow and withered. After the rain, I returned to the straw hut. I felt that nothing had happened during the night, only the sound of thunder was incessant. Moreover..." At this point, Zhang Xiaohua purposely paused for a moment before continuing, "Furthermore, when I woke up in the morning, I was just worried about the medicinal field. Only then did I realize that the medicinal plants were alive, so I immediately went to inform you. As for the specific reason, I really don't know." He Tianshu thought for a moment and knew that what Zhang Xiaohua said was the truth. In his eyes, Zhang Xiaohua was just a youth who knew a little bit of boxing skills. He was very ordinary, so it was impossible for him to have any power to turn back and restore the medicinal plants. Moreover, he also knew that Zhang Xiaohua had a bad habit of sleeping soundly, so why would he expect to get any useful information from his mouth? But Zhang Xiaohua was after all the first person to discover the changes in the medicinal plants and was also the only one who was keeping watch in the medicinal field. He could only ask again and again. Could it be that the medicinal plants were short of water? He Tianshu came up with an unimaginable thought. But the growth of medicinal plants was different from ordinary crops and flowers. They didn't need to be watered daily, or even watered once every few days. The roots of these medicinal plants were usually rather developed and had enough ability to absorb water from the soil. But if it wasn't because of a lack of water, how could they be revived after a night of heavy rain? He Tianshu was somewhat scratching his ears and cheeks. He had to find a reason to tell the elders in the medicine hall. They all knew that these medicinal plants were about to wither, and now that they suddenly came back to life, there had to be an explanation. At this moment, He Tianshu was secretly regretting. If he had reported to the hall a little later, how good would that be? The rain didn't stop and everyone didn't want to return to the small courtyard. After standing by the medicinal field for a while, Nie Xiao'er scurried everyone into the straw shed. But this straw shed that Zhang Xiaohua had built was originally for one purpose, so how could it accommodate so many people? The few of them were laughing and joking inside and almost tore down the straw shed. However, Zhang Xiaohua didn't feel bad about it. This straw shed was used to practice inner force skills. Now that they knew that it was harmful to the medicinal plants, naturally they couldn't continue to practice here. Zhang Xiaohua had already planned to wait for the weather to clear up and immediately tear it down. He Tianshu didn't know Zhang Xiaohua's thoughts. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was a little distracted, he thought that he was distressed over the straw shed that he had built himself. He scolded Nie Xiao'er and the others and then asked them how they should deal with the elders in the medicine hall if they came to inspect. Actually, for this kind of matter, as a team leader, He Tianshu didn't need to discuss it with Nie Xiao'er and the others. But today's matter was very strange. Who knew when it would be leaked to the medicine hall, and he didn't know the reason. If he didn't discuss it, it would leave a hidden danger for him. Seeing that He Tianshu asked such a question, Nie Xiao'er and the others looked at each other. Yes, the matter of the medicinal plants dying had already been reported. Who knew, in a while, the elders in the medicine hall would come. How should they deal with it? Just say that the medicinal plants that were about to wither yesterday had revived because of the heavy rain last night. Could the elders believe these words? Hence, Nie Xiao'er and the others all talked at once and thought of many reasons, but He Tianshu shook his head. In the end, everyone's mouths were dry and they were at a loss. In the end, it was He Tianshu who made the final decision. Just tell them the truth. It was up to them whether they believed it or not. That was the truth. What kind of nonsense could they make up? Zhang Xiaohua, who was at the side, heard He Tianshu and the others discussing and finding the culprit that saved the medicinal plants. She couldn't help but feel secretly pleased. Fortunately, she didn't show herself. If they knew that she could save and nourish the medicinal plants, wouldn't she be locked up and studied like a monster in the future? Who knows, they might even ask her to solve the problem of the seeds of those medicinal plants not germinating. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but have a thought. The growth of these medicinal plants required the nourishment of the qi of heaven and earth. Then, shouldn't the germination of the medicinal plants also require the nourishment of the qi of heaven and earth? Did the seeds of these medicinal plants that could germinate successfully germinate because they required less qi of heaven and earth? Did those medicinal plants that didn't germinate require a lot of qi of heaven and earth, so they couldn't germinate? The more Zhang Xiaohua thought about it, the more she felt that it made sense. She was almost certain of her conjecture. However, to remove the big stone in Yan's heart and help these seeds germinate, Zhang Xiaohua was unable to do it. He risked his life to attract the heavenly lightning and almost cracked his meridians. Only then did he save those medicinal plants. And this rich qi of heaven and earth still couldn't make the seeds buried underground germinate. It could be imagined how much qi of heaven and earth those seeds required. It was estimated that even if Zhang Xiaohua was turned into charcoal, it still wouldn't be fulfilled. However, since Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation required the qi of heaven and earth, and the germination of the seeds also required the qi of heaven and earth. Perhaps when Zhang Xiaohua found the cultivation method, it would be the time for the seeds to germinate. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua also secretly made up her mind. Since she knew the reason why the seeds couldn't germinate, she naturally would try her best to find a solution. Not for anything else, but for Yan's kindness to her. Until the afternoon, when the heavy rain stopped and a huge rainbow hung in the sky, the elders of the medicinal hall still didn't come. He Tianshu and the others couldn't help but feel sad for being forgotten by the medicinal hall. They were still trying their best to plant the medicinal plants and report the situation of the medicinal plants to the hall in time, but looking at them, it seemed that they had forgotten about it. Although they were sad, He Tianshu and the others were also disciples of the Misty School. They had been trained by the sect for so many years, and the belief of being loyal to the sect leader and the Misty School had long been rooted in their hearts. Therefore, since the others ignored them, they had to go and report the good news themselves. Seeing that they were going back to the medicinal hall, Zhang Xiaohua was also happy. This medicinal field was no longer able to cultivate, and there was no qi in the forest. Where could she go to cultivate? Naturally, it was the medicinal hall. There were many medicinal plants there. It shouldn't be a big problem for her to snatch some on the way, right? Although this right was a question, in fact, Zhang Xiaohua had already defined it as a yes. Hearing that Zhang Xiaohua wanted to go to the medicinal hall with him, He Tianshu immediately realized that Zhang Xiaohua hadn't returned the special approval token from Hall Master Bai. During the martial arts exhibition, he only saw Zhang Xiaohua taking the limelight, but he forgot about this token. When he returned to the Huanxi villa, he encountered the matter of the medicinal plants, so he threw everything to the back of his mind, let alone a token that had nothing to do with him. He Tianshu said to Zhang Xiaohua, you should return the token that Hall Master gave you. After all, the martial arts exhibition is over. It's not good to keep holding on to it. Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, okay, Captain He, this is the last time. I'll return it to you before we come back tomorrow. He Tianshu smiled and said, no, you can give it to me now. What's so fun about the medicinal hall? I don't think there's anything new there. Why do you want to go there? Zhang Xiaohua said, Captain He, that place is where you grew up. Naturally, you don't feel much about it. But I haven't been there much. I want to go and have a look. How about this? When I enter the medicinal hall, I'll give you the token. How about it? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua haggle like this, He Tianshu felt rather helpless. Going to the medicinal hall wasn't a big deal, but he always felt that Zhang Xiaohua wasn't a disciple of the Misty School. Going to the medicinal hall wasn't a legitimate thing. In the past, he was apprehensive about Zhang Xiaohua's aptitude and didn't dare to have the idea of accepting Zhang Xiaohua as a disciple. However, during the martial arts exhibition, Zhang Xiaohua helped the Misty School regain their face. He secretly doubted his own vision. But since Zhang Xiaohua had already shown her talent to gang leader O, the honor of being Zhang Xiaohua's master wouldn't fall on his head. Thus, he didn't want to have such extravagant thoughts. Otherwise, he would have already found Zhang Xiaohua to have a heart-to-heart talk. Chapter 208. In the end, He Tianshu failed to resist Zhang Xiaohua and took him and his disciples to the pharmacy hall. As soon as they entered the ethereal heights, they felt a different feeling. They couldn't tell what kind of feeling it was, but it felt different from before. Not to mention that the guards at the archway were obviously more conscientious and questioned Zhang Xiaohua a lot. If it weren't for the fact that a guard at the square of the meeting hall had seen Zhang Xiaohua's great power and had a deep impression of her, it would have been difficult for them to enter with the token of Huanxi Mountain Villa that Zhang Xiaohua wore. After entering the villa, the number of disciples on the road increased significantly. Previously, when Zhang Xiaohua came here, he rarely saw ethereal sex disciples in groups of 3 or 4, whispering to each other. However, today was different. Along the way, he saw countless small groups whispering to each other under the trees and at the corners of the walls. Their expressions were strange. If they all squatted down with twigs in their hands, Zhang Xiaohua might know what they were doing. But if they whispered like this, even though Zhang Xiaohua's ears and eyes were sharp, she couldn't hear clearly. Zhang Xiaohua could only look at He Tianshu and the others strangely. Unexpectedly, He Tianshu and the others were also confused. When they returned to the sect yesterday, everything was normal. How did it become like this in just 20 hours? Could it be that something big happened in the sect? This thought flashed in the minds of He Tianshu and the others at the same time. What could it be? Monk Changgung of the Dalan Temple had just brought the little monk back with the light of friendship of the Misty School. He wouldn't turn hostile immediately. Could it be? What could it be? No one knew, not to mention Zhang Xiaohua. But after all, the pharmacy hall was some distance away from the archway and was not within the activity range of the disciples of the pharmacy hall. Therefore, until they arrived at the pharmacy hall, they didn't see any familiar disciples, and it was difficult to catch any hint of sensitive information. Seeing the entrance of the pharmacy hall, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel a shadow in her heart. She had just been protected by the guards of the archway. Perhaps the pharmacy hall, which was even more heavily guarded, would interrogate her even more. Sure enough, although the guard had seen Zhang Xiaohua before, he still checked everything about Zhang Xiaohua seriously. His meticulous look made Zhang Xiaohua laugh. She almost wanted to say to the guard, "Big brother, don't pretend. We've seen each other just a few days ago." However, when Zhang Xiaohua took out the token that Hall Master Bai had given her, the guard was put in a difficult position. He said, "Little brother, it's not that I don't know you, nor am I purposely making things difficult for you. Hall Master Bai just said this morning that without his note, no one who isn't a member of the medicinal hall is allowed to enter the medicinal hall." Gosh, Zhang Xiaohua was bewildered. How did this pharmacy hall become a place where things were done based on a note? Although gang leader O had already promised to give him a token to allow him to enter the pharmacy hall freely, he hadn't gotten that imperial sword yet, after all, so he had no proof. Therefore, he could only look sideways at He Tianshu. He Tianshu was really helpless under his resentful gaze, so he quietly asked, "Little brother guard, I don't know what happened in the gang. Why is it so strict? It's not the first time that Zhang Xiaohua has entered our pharmacy hall. Can you make things easier for her?" The guard bitterly said, "Captain He, do you think I want to do this? I heard that this little brother has helped our Misty School regain face. If it's within my ability, I will definitely take care of him. However, this is Hall Master Bai's order this morning, so I don't dare to overstep it." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she didn't want to make things difficult for him. She just wanted to take advantage of other people's medicinal herbs and draw more vitality into her body. Since this path was blocked, Zhang Xiaohua thought of retreating. She was just about to return the token to He Tianshu when she heard a series of hurried footsteps. A group of people came out from inside. First was an old man with a ruddy complexion and skin as fine as a baby's. Following behind him was a group of older elders. When He Tianshu and the others saw them, they immediately bowed respectfully and said, "Greetings to Hall Master and elders." When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she didn't dare to neglect and quickly cupped her hands in greeting. Hall Master Bai was in a hurry. He just waved his hand slightly and was about to go out the door. However, when his eyes swept past Zhang Xiaohua, he couldn't help but be stunned. He had seen Zhang Xiaohua in the last competition of the martial arts exhibition. He had also seen O Peng's attitude towards Zhang Xiaohua. Moreover, he had just learned that Zhang Xiaohu had been recognized by O Peng and had agreed to teach him the ethereal divine art. Even if such a young man didn't have outstanding martial arts and wasn't a disciple of the Misty School, he still didn't want to offend him. Therefore, he stopped slightly and asked, "He Tianshu, what's the matter?" He Tianshu hurriedly smiled and said, "Hall Master, yesterday we reported to the elders that the herbs we planted in Huanxi Mountain Villa were dying." Hearing this, Hall Master Bai couldn't help frowning. He Tianshu hurriedly said, "However, after last night's wind and rain, this morning, Zhang Xiaohua found that most of these herbs had been saved. Therefore, we hurried back to report, so that the elders wouldn't have to come to Huanxi Mountain Villa in vain." He Tianshu naturally wanted to help him punish Zhang Xiaohua by giving the first credit of finding the herbs alive to Zhang Xiaohua. Of course, he mentioned the elders in the end to vent his depression of waiting for a day. Hall Master Bai couldn't help but laugh. He said with a smile, "Don't complain. I know you've been working hard in Huanxi Mountain Villa. Yesterday, I heard from the elders that the herb's death was not caused by human effort. They didn't mean to punish you. You must have seen that since today, strange things have happened not only in Huanxi Mountain Villa, but also in our pharmaceutical hall and other places in the sect. How can the elders in the hall have time to go to Huanxi Mountain Villa? Hurry back to your residence. Be careful these days. Don't go back to Huanxi Mountain Villa for the time being." Hearing this, He Tianshu hurriedly saluted and said, "I don't dare. I'll listen to Hall Master." Then he hurriedly returned the token to Hall Master Bai and said, "Zhang Xiaohua still wants to enter our pharmaceutical hall. What do you think?" Hall Master Bai didn't take the token and said, "Let Zhang Xiaohua take this token. Today's situation is special, so I gave a strict order. However, since you've come to the door, it's impolite to not let you in. Go in first, but don't run around. Remember, don't run around." After that, he hurriedly left. Looking at the token in He Tianshu's hand, Zhang Xiaohua wanted to call Hall Master Bai and tell him that she didn't need this token. However, this was obviously humiliating him. Now Zhang Xiaohua, who was mature, couldn't do it. Anyway, this token was not heavy. It didn't matter if she took one more. Following He Tianshu and others into the pharmaceutical hall, Zhang Xiaohua faintly realized why Hall Master Bai had given a strict order to prohibit the disciples outside the pharmaceutical hall from entering and leaving. The disciples of the pharmaceutical hall all looked serious, as if there was a great disaster coming. He Tianshu hurriedly stopped a disciple he was familiar with. After asking carefully, he knew that something big had happened in Ethereal Heights last night. Last night's thunder was very loud. Huanxi Mountain Villa was so close to Ethereal Heights that it almost thundered above the Misty School's head. For the whole night, none of the disciples in the school dared to practice the mental cultivation method of internal strength. When they got up in the morning, it was no different from the usual morning. They just felt that the air was extraordinarily fresh. However, on this beautiful morning, two incredible things happened. First, the disciples of the pharmacist hall, as usual, were patrolling the medicinal fields. They discovered that the medicinal plants in the fields were growing at a crazy rate. It was almost the height of a normal 10 days of growth. Even the weeds in the fields had grown very tall. They naturally had to report this phenomenon to the elders in the pharmacist hall. Secondly, the Misty School had a total of 5 forbidden areas, 3 of which were occupied by the pharmaceutical hall. Usually, although the disciples in the school were not allowed to come close to the forbidden areas, the herbs in the herbal field near the forbidden areas had always grown better than in other places. Therefore, occasionally, there would be disciples coming here to look at the herbs. Speaking of which, they were unlucky. There were 2 disciples who heard that there was a strange phenomenon this morning where the herbs were growing like crazy. Naturally, they thought that the herbs at the edge of the forbidden areas must be more luxuriant, so they eagerly came to observe. However, who would have thought that when they just walked to the edge of the forbidden areas, before they could see the situation of the herbs clearly, one disciple disappeared into thin air. The other disciple was so scared that he almost fell to the ground and struggled to crawl out. Only then did someone report to the hall master. Before Hall Master Bai had time to give an order to prohibit the disciples from approaching the forbidden areas, there was news that 2 more disciples had disappeared near the forbidden areas. The most frightening thing was that it wasn't just the pharmaceutical hall. One of the other 2 forbidden areas had also devoured a disciple. Only the last forbidden area was too far away from the Misty School's disciples' area of activity, so there was no strange phenomenon. This kind of strange phenomenon where the disciples disappeared into thin air was hard to explain. This caused the entire Misty School to be in a state of panic, afraid that the misfortune of disappearing disciples would suddenly befall them. However, an order from the hall master came soon after. No one was allowed to come within 20 feet of the forbidden areas. As long as they were within 20 feet of the forbidden areas, they would be safe. In fact, the Misty School's rules had long stated that the disciples were forbidden from going near the forbidden areas. However, there hadn't been any strange phenomena in the forbidden areas for hundreds of years, so everyone had long forgotten about it. The disappearance of the disciples and the hall master's order to reveal that there were 300 taels of silver here reminded the Misty School's disciples once again that there were hidden dangers in peaceful times. Don't forget the dangers around you just for the sake of long-term peace. Hearing this, He Tianshu and the others' expressions changed. When they were young, they often went to play near the forbidden areas. Now that they thought about it, they were still scared. They were really lucky not to have been devoured. On the other hand, Zhang Xiaohua's face was full of confusion. The strange phenomenon last night, the rolling thunder, could be said to have been caused by him. Wasn't it just drawing in a large amount of yuan qi? How could the forbidden areas devour people? Chapter 209. Hearing that such a supernatural event had happened in the sect, He Tianshu looked at Zhang Xiaohua worriedly and asked, Zhang Xiaohua, the sect is not peaceful now. I think you should go back to Huanxi Villa first. You just heard that Hall Master Bai asked us to stay in the pharmacy temporarily. You have to go back and take care of the medicine field. Don't play here. After that, he gave the token back to Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua reached out and took it. He laughed and said, Captain He, I'm not a child. How can I run around? I've only seen one of the forbidden areas in the sect from afar. I won't go in. Besides, I came here with great difficulty. Do you have the heart to drive me away now? I haven't even put a stool under my butt yet. He Tianshu said earnestly, Zhang Xiaohua, don't you see that the disciples in the sect are in a state of panic? Do you still have the mood to joke? Listen to me and go back quickly. Zhang Xiaohua tilted his head and said, Captain He, it's getting late. I'll go back now. I haven't tidied up my room yet. You can't let me stay in the straw shed. The herbs have already come alive. It's meaningless for me to stay there. He Tianshu listened to him talk about the straw shed and the herbs. He could only nod and say, all right, since you're determined to stay in the pharmacy hall today, then come with me. I'll take you to the guest room. However, you must remember, don't go anywhere. I don't have time to accompany you, okay? Zhang Xiaohua heard and nodded happily. He kept promising that he wouldn't go out. He Tianshu didn't know whether to believe him or not. This leg was on Zhang Xiaohua's leg. No matter how capable He Tianshu was, he couldn't control it. After sending Zhang Xiaohua to the guest room, He Tianshu told him again and then hurried back. As he walked, he said, You still want to sleep in the guest room at this time? Don't leave your life here. How could Zhang Xiaohua not know that he was talking to himself? However, he had originally planned to stay in the guest room and cultivate the Carefree Heart Sutra. He had no intention of going out for a stroll, so how could there be any problems? When He Tianshu was far away, Zhang Xiaohua looked around the empty courtyard. She closed the door tightly and quickly walked into the house. The guest room was very quiet and tidy. He really didn't know why it was so clean when no one was staying here. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the couch and sat cross-legged. She was not in a hurry to draw qi into her body. Last night, the thunder rumbled, and Zhang Xiaohua fainted. However, with the help of Twinkle, she did not stop practicing the Heart Sutra. This morning, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned by the resurrection of the herbs. She hurriedly informed He Tianshu and the others. Then, she washed and changed her clothes. She did not have time to check the qi in her body. Zhang Xiaohua had only just learned the basics of the Heart Sutra. She could not move her heart at will and check her inner force cultivation at any time. Only when she went to a place where there was no one and sat cross-legged to draw qi could she carefully sense it. Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She was overjoyed. A day ago, the Jinqi in his body was as thin as a thread. But now, it was as thick as a cotton thread. It was at least 10 times thicker than before. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be flabbergasted by this improvement. Then, he began to think. If he could attract lightning every day and cultivate in a place with dense Jinqi, wouldn't he be able to enter the second stage of the Carefree Heart Sutra much earlier? However, just as this idea appeared in her mind, she immediately nipped it in the bud. Attracting heavenly thunder was just a risky move. If she was at the end of her rope, perhaps it could be used as a glimmer of hope. If she had to take this kind of shortcut every day, Zhang Xiaohua secretly estimated that she would be struck into ashes 2 or 3 times. After all, she knew nothing about the pain last night and what happened after she fainted. Perhaps the bracelet could protect her for a while, but how could she count on it for a lifetime? On the road of cultivation, she had to take one step at a time. After thinking about it carefully, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly felt her heart lighten. It was as if she had taken off a layer of gauze. She felt as if her heart was facing the moon. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua calmed down and prepared to guide the qi. This time, it was easier to calm down than before. Not long after, she entered the state. Zhang Xiaohua followed the circulation route of the first level of the Carefree Heart Sutra. She guided the qi that was as thin as a cotton thread to flow smoothly through her meridians. Every time it flowed through a meridian, Zhang Xiaohua felt that the meridian and the nearby body were incomparably comfortable. After a cycle, her whole body felt as if it had eaten something very nutritious. Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but praise in her heart, no wonder everyone wants to practice the mental cultivation method of internal strength. I didn't expect it to be so refreshing. After a cycle, the qi that was as thick as a cotton thread didn't have any obvious changes, but Zhang Xiaohua had a hint of understanding in her heart. This qi didn't have any changes, but the growth was subtle. She couldn't perceive it. Just like when she just took the qi into her body, there was qi, but she didn't know why. After checking the results of attracting thunder last night, Zhang Xiaohua released her perception out of her body again. In an instant, she felt that the qi of heaven and earth in the outside world seemed to be richer than the last time she came. However, Zhang Xiaohua was relieved. She attracted thunder last night. The qi of heaven and earth was so rich that the herbs in the Huanqi Mountain Villa could survive. This pharmacy was not far from the Huanqi Mountain Villa. There were more herbs than there, so it could definitely retain more qi of heaven and earth. Thinking of more qi of heaven and earth, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be moved. Was the forbidden area of the Misty School related to qi of heaven and earth? Could it be that when the qi of heaven and earth was rich, it could trigger some changes in the forbidden area? However, she seemed to have done the shady business of attracting thunder a month ago. Why didn't the forbidden area change? Thinking deeper, the first time she attracted thunder was just an accident. That night, the qi of heaven and earth in the Huanqi Mountain Villa was just a little richer, but it was a far cry from last night. Not to mention this pharmacy, there shouldn't be much more qi of heaven and earth than before. Presumably, it couldn't trigger any changes in the forbidden area. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but laugh in her heart. What was she thinking about? As the ancients said, curiosity killed the cat. She didn't want to explore the forbidden area out of curiosity. Only an idiot would do that. After making up her mind, Zhang Xiaohua used the Carefree Heart Sutra to relax all the pores on her body. She released all her senses and guided the qi of heaven and earth into her body. The qi of heaven and earth floating outside seemed to be directed by an invisible hand. It was like a long river or a sea, rushing towards Zhang Xiaohua's body. The rushing was so fast that it even brought a slight breeze. Zhang Xiaohua happily guided the qi of heaven and earth into her body while thinking to herself, I don't know how much qi of heaven and earth there is in this pharmacy. Is it enough for those medicinal herbs to use? Will the medicinal herbs in the pharmacy also wither and die if I guide the qi of heaven and earth into my body like this? However, she didn't show any signs of stopping. She wasn't a disciple of the Misty School, let alone a disciple of the pharmacy. Why would she have such scruples? This Misty School had a big business. It shouldn't be a problem for her to waste a little, right? Putting aside the fact that Zhang Xiaohua was wantonly guiding the Misty School's qi of heaven and earth into her body from the pharmacy's guest room, Hall Master Bai of the pharmacy hurriedly brought Elder He and the others to the meeting hall. The meeting hall was already filled with the middle and upper management of the Misty School. The atmosphere was very solemn. After Hall Master Bai, Elder He, and the others saluted Gang Leader O and the other colleagues, those who should be seated sat down. Those who should be standing behind others also stood in their positions. Gang Leader O looked around and said seriously, since everyone is here, I'll say a few words first. Although the forbidden area devoured people today was caused by a natural disaster, in my opinion, it was completely caused by the disciples ignoring the rules of the faction. The faction's rules have always recorded that the disciples are forbidden to go near the forbidden area. Because there hasn't been any abnormalities in the forbidden area all these years, it caused the disciples to ignore the forbidden area and the faction's rules. Everyone, you live in hardship and die in peace. This is a typical example of not paying attention to safety and putting the faction's rules on the shelf. This is just some changes in a few forbidden areas. If there is really a strong enemy suddenly attacking the Misty Mountain Villa, how will our disciples perform? Oh Peng paused for a moment and drank a mouthful of tea before continuing, also, our ethereal sect is a big sect that has existed for thousands of years. Even though we are on the decline now, we are all working hard. We are all contributing our youth and hot blood to bring the ethereal sect to greater heights. However, details determine success or failure. Everyone, thousands of years ago, the seniors of our Misty School made a detailed emergency plan. When it came to the emergency, where did the plan go? How many of you here know how to deal with the emergency? Go out and take a look. What have the brothers in the faction become? Each and every one of you is like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. All kinds of opinions, rumors, and guesses are coming out. If the women of Mingsue Hall are so frightened, I can understand. But who are they? Some of them are wearing brocade clothes, some of them are wearing high-level clothes, and some of the management staff are also participating. Look, what is this like? Is this still the behavior of a disciple of a big faction? If you had studied the emergency plan early on and practiced the emergency plan in advance, how could this have happened? Oh Peng was endlessly scolding. Below, everyone lowered their heads, their faces full of shame. To be honest, this was the first time they had heard of the emergency plan. They didn't even know what the contents were. But from what O Peng said, this kind of thing existed thousands of years ago. It must be something important. Why didn't they learn it? After reading it, they still needed to spend more time on learning in the future. Seeing everyone's ashamed appearance, O Peng was also incomparably refreshed. Only in this way could he not let down the novelty that he had found by flipping through the books in the faction early in the morning. Chapter 210. After O Peng was done with his lecture, he coughed and said, "Skill can only be seen in the subtleties. Everyone, we still have a long way to go in order to realize the great goal of revitalizing the Misty School. Don't let your guard down. I still want to walk proudly in the martial world with everyone when our Misty School is proud and elated." When everyone heard this, they all stood up and said, we will follow sect master's instructions. Only then did Peng reveal a trace of a smile. He gestured with his hands and said, "Everyone, please take a seat. We've lived these peaceful days for too long, so much so that we've forgotten the dangers of Jianghu. These peaceful days are for us to conserve our energy and work hard for our future rise. We can't treat it as warm water to boil a frog to death. Just look at the Dalan Temple, a small law enforcement hall, and they were able to strut around at our Misty School's grand ceremony. They were simply going too far. If we don't catch up, how can our Misty School have a place in this splendid martial world? Alright, I won't say any more. I'll share my thoughts with everyone and pass them on to the commoner disciples of the third rank and above. Let them build up their confidence and not make groundless accusations just because of a trace of strangeness." Everyone nodded in agreement. Then, Peng asked, "How's the situation in the various forbidden areas?" Hall Master Bai of the pharmacy hall hurriedly stepped forward and replied, reporting to Sect Master, "This subordinate has arranged for people to guard the 3 forbidden areas of the pharmacy hall, preventing others from approaching. The situation in the forbidden areas is the same as this morning. The thin white mist is still the same. It hasn't shrunk back, nor has it expanded outwards." Hall Master Shur of the Divine Machine Hall also hurriedly stepped forward and replied, reporting to Sect Master, "The same is true for the forbidden area of the Divine Machine Hall." Zhang Qingyue also stepped forward and said, reporting to Sect Master, "The disciples of the forbidden area behind the mountain also sent people to guard it. They didn't allow others to come close to observe." Peng nodded and said, "The disciples' emotions are still somewhat unstable." Hall Master Bai and Hall Master Shur both said in shame, "Sect Master, please punish us. This subordinate wasn't strict enough." Peng didn't say anything and just said, "Actually, as long as you're a human, even if you're a martial arts expert, you're bound to have a psychological fear of unfamiliar and dangerous things. It's understandable. They only know that the forbidden area is a place that no one is allowed to approach according to the rules of the society. Before, they didn't know the details, so they didn't have any reverence for it. Now that they know it can actually kill people, it's natural that they'll be terrified." Then, he waved his hand and had the 3 of them return to their seats. Then, he said, "Actually, this forbidden area of the sect was the holy land of the sect thousands of years ago. However, the world changed and it became what it is today. As for the disciples who went missing, they may have encountered other opportunities and may not have lost their lives." When everyone heard this, they were all shocked. They all looked at Peng, waiting for the Grand Gang leader to clear up their doubts. However, Peng smiled and said, "These things are all secrets of the faction. Only the previous faction leaders know about them. The reason I'm revealing some of them here is to make you feel a little more at ease. I can't tell you anything else." Only then did everyone withdraw their gazes. They thought to themselves, "It's different to be a faction leader. He really knows more than us. It's not that we don't study hard, it's that we don't have the opportunity to study at all." At this time, Peng said thoughtfully, "Actually, the appearance of the forbidden area is something that has never happened in hundreds of years. For our Misty School, it may not be a bad thing. Perhaps it's a kind of opportunity." Then, he suddenly tilted his head and asked Zhang Qingyue, "Qingyue, has the matter I asked Zhang Xiaohua to do been completed?" Zhang Qingyue was stunned. His eyes were full of stars, and he looked at his respected master with admiration. He said to himself, "He is indeed my idol. Look at his thinking. What a big leap. Just now he was talking about the forbidden area. Why did he suddenly talk about Zhang Xiaohua's fist manual?" When he heard Peng say that it was the matter he asked Zhang Xiaohua to do, he knew that his master didn't want others to know about the Big Dipper magical fist manual. He said, reporting to faction leader, "I just finished the last day of the martial arts exhibition yesterday. Today, I encountered the forbidden area. I haven't had the time to look for him yet." Peng said, "Then hurry up and do it. This matter is very important. Put down other matters first." Zhang Qingyue's heart trembled. He thought to himself, "What's the big deal about recording the fist manual? I originally wanted someone else to do it, but it looks like I have to make the trip myself. Although he thought this, he quickly responded, I'll follow faction leader's orders. After saying this, his heart couldn't help but move again. Could it be that the forbidden area, the opportunity for the Misty School, had something to do with Zhang Xiaohua's fist manual? But even if the Big Dipper magical fist manual was the best fist technique in the world, it was still just a fist technique. Could it carry forward the Misty School? Hearing that Peng wanted to look for Zhang Xiaohua, Hall Master Bai of the Pharmacy Hall hurriedly stood up and said, reporting to faction leader, that Zhang Xiaohua you mentioned is now in the Pharmacy Hall. Do you want to call him over? Ha! Peng couldn't help but be stunned. He said, why did he go to the Pharmacy Hall again? What's so attractive about your Pharmacy Hall that he actually wants a token from me? He wants to enter and leave the Pharmacy Hall freely. Speaking up to this point, he ordered Zhang Qingyue, when you go, tell him about the matter you promised Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Qingyue nodded in agreement. Hall Master Bai was also dumbfounded. He didn't understand what was going on. He said, this subordinate also doesn't know. However, he came with the Pharmacy Hall's disciples, He Tianshu and the others. He said that he wanted to report about the Huanxi Mountain Villa's medicinal herbs. Peng asked curiously, what happened to the Huanxi Mountain Villa's medicinal herbs? Did those seeds germinate? Hall Master Bai replied, the seeds didn't germinate. It's just that the other medicinal herbs withered and came back to life today. Then, he told Peng everything he knew. Peng's spirits were lifted when he heard this. He muttered, is the world really going to change? But then, he became dispirited again. He said, but, even if there are changes, how can our Misty School take the initiative? Then, he fell into deep thought. The other people in the conference hall were puzzled. Although Peng's voice was soft, everyone had profound inner strength. They had already heard what he said. Everyone couldn't help but look at each other. What did the survival of the medicinal herbs have to do with the world changing? What was the world changing into? How could the Misty School take the initiative? But seeing Peng like this, they thought that these were the secrets of the faction. They had no right to know. They could only look at Peng quietly, hoping that he would reveal more. But after a while, when Peng realized that he had lost his composure, he didn't say another word. Peng put away his forceps and said in his mind, sorry, everyone. I was distracted for a moment. Hall Master Shi immediately said, big sect leader is busy every day. It must be tiring for you. Why don't you rest early? As for the rest, why don't we talk about it tomorrow? It's not anything important anyway. Peng thought for a moment and said, actually, it's not that tiring. I was just a little distracted. Alright, you've all been tired for a day. The feeling of having your heart palpitating and your body palpitating doesn't feel good. Tell the disciples that the forbidden area isn't filled with man-eating monsters. It's our holy land. Let them have a good sleep today and don't think too much. Everyone accepted the order and left. Before Hall Master Bai of the Medicine Hall left, he said, big sect leader, you don't have to give Zhang Xiaohua the token you gave him. I've already given him one. It's fine as long as he can use it. Peng waved his hand and said, no need. I've already promised him. How can I go back on my words? Besides, your token can only be used in the medicine hall. Who else in the sect will recognize it? Hearing this, Hall Master Bai was shocked. He thought to himself, this Zhang Xiaohua only one face for the Misty School in the arena. Why is big sect leader's reward so great? Zhang Xiaohua only wants to enter and leave the medicine hall freely. He must be willing to serve the herbs and read the books in the hall. Judging from big sect leader's words, it seems like the entire Misty School is willing to let him roam freely. What's wrong with this? Hall Master Bai didn't have time to think. He left the meeting hall with everyone with doubts. Zhang Qingyue was the last to leave. Just as he moved, he heard Peng say, Qingyue, wait for a moment. I have something to say to you. Zhang Qingyue immediately stopped and returned to his original spot. After everyone had walked far away, Peng stared at Zhang Qingyue for a long time. Only when Zhang Qingyue felt his hair stand on end did he say, "Qingyue, you're the eldest disciple of our sect's leader. It's been hard on you all these years. You've handled all the sect's affairs in an orderly manner. You've been a great help to me." Zhang Qingyue was baffled. He quickly bowed and said, "Big sect leader is exaggerating. It's all big sect leader's credit. This disciple was only there to help." Peng saw Zhang Qingyue's modesty and said with a smile, "I know you're humble. However, I've seen everything you've done. I won't treat you unfairly." Zhang Qingyue quickly bowed and thanked him. Peng said again, "Do you know why I asked you to stay behind today?" Zhang Qingyue was stunned. He thought for a moment and his heart couldn't help but beat faster. Could it be? Peng's martial arts were excellent. He already knew Zhang Qingyue's thoughts from the changes in his body. He secretly praised Zhang Qingyue's quick-wittedness. He said, "Qingyue, you guessed right. Since you're the eldest disciple of the sect's leader, the position of sect leader will naturally be yours. There are many things that I should tell you early. Otherwise, if you forget in the future, it'll be very bad." Zhang Qingyue calmed his emotions and said, "Master, there's still a lot of time in the future. Why are you in such a hurry?" Peng said, "Your state of mind is not bad. However, there are many changes in the forbidden area. I'm sure there will be many more in the future. I'm telling you early so that you can be mentally prepared." Zhang Qingyue nodded and listened quietly. Peng looked at the empty hall and sighed, "Speaking of this forbidden area, I have to mention the immortal puppet from 10,000 years ago." Immortal puppet. Zhang Qingyue was shocked. "Please collect, please tip, thank you." Chapter 211. Zhang Qingyue was very puzzled and asked, "Master, what is this immortal puppet? It sounds very awkward." Peng took a sip of tea and let out a long breath. This immortal puppet, as the name suggests, is the annihilation of the immortal Tao. The annihilation of the immortal Tao? Zhang Qingyue was shocked and almost jumped up. Are you talking about the immortals in those books that people read when they're bored? Don't they live as long as the heavens and have great magical powers? How can they be annihilated? Also, Zhang Qingyue asked suspiciously, "Do these immortals really exist? Why haven't I seen them before?" Peng looked at Zhang Qingyue and was not surprised. When he heard his master talk about the annihilation of the immortal Tao, his reaction was much stronger than his. His mental state was much stronger than his back then. Therefore, he smiled and said, "The immortal Tao I'm talking about is the path of cultivation, which is the path from a mortal to an immortal. Moreover, how can there be any immortals in this world? They are all in the heavens." Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, "Master, you're deceiving me. When I was young, my grandmother always told me stories about immortals in the heavens, but how come no immortals came down from the heavens?" Peng said, "The heavens I'm talking about is not the sky above our heads, but another world." Another world? Zhang Qingyue was completely confused. Peng looked at the young man who was shocked by new knowledge and was very satisfied. He said, "Although there are no immortals in our world, a long, long time ago, probably 10,000 years ago, there was a group of people who wanted to cultivate to become immortals. They called themselves immortal cultivators. They had incomparable magical powers, could fly, and could move mountains and seas. Moreover, their lifespans were very long. In the eyes of mortals, they were actually no different from immortals." Ah! Zhang Qingyue was dumbfounded and said, "Aren't they immortals? By the way, Master, can you tell me what the other world is like?" Peng frowned and said, "About that, the secret books in the sect don't record it. They only say that when immortal cultivators reach the peak of our world, they will fly into the clouds and become immortals. They will fly into the other world. As for whether that world is above our heads and what it looks like, no one knows. No immortals have ever returned from that world." Oh, I see. Zhang Qingyue somewhat understood. Then, Zhang Qingyue couldn't help but ask, what about now? Where did those cultivators go? Have they all ascended to become immortals? Peng smiled bitterly and said, according to the sect's secret records, it is not easy to become an immortal. There might not even be 1 in a million people who can succeed. How can it be as you think? Everyone has become an immortal. Zhang Qingyue was puzzled and said, since they haven't cultivated to become immortals, didn't you just say that they have a long lifespan? There must be some who have lived until now. Why haven't I seen them before? You haven't even heard of it? As soon as he said that, his eyes lit up. Could this be related to the destruction of the immortal Tao? Peng nodded and said, yes, it's because the immortal Tao was destroyed that they couldn't survive until now. Even their inheritances have changed. Then, Peng sorted out his thoughts and said slowly, actually, in the beginning, there was no immortal Tao in this world. There were only mediocre ordinary people who lived a muddled and rigid life. I don't know when, but 4 immortal cultivators suddenly came to this world. Seeing the pleasant scenery of this world and the simplicity of the world, he decided to stay and establish a sect here to teach his disciples. Hearing this, Zhang Qingyue opened his mouth and wanted to ask something, but he didn't dare to interrupt Peng. Peng saw this and said, Qingyue, what do you want to ask? Zhang Qingyue asked curiously, Master, I want to know how these 4 immortal cultivators came to this world. They must have come from the sky. Peng smiled and said, the secret books recorded that they used something called transmission formation. Zhang Qingyue nodded and knew that his master hadn't seen it before, so he didn't say anything more. Peng pondered for a while, then continued, they're the same as us martial artists. What we cultivate is jinqi, and what they cultivate is also jinqi. However, our jinqi is created by our own thoughts, and is tempered and matured within our own bodies. They, on the other hand, draw something from the outside world called heaven and earth yuan qi into their bodies, and form their own jinqi. Forget it. At this point, Peng became somewhat impatient, and waved his hand, saying, let's not compare martial arts with cultivation. Many words are the same, so it's easy to confuse them. Immortal cultivators attract heaven and earth yuan qi into their bodies and cultivate in their bodies. They widen their meridians and gather true qi. All of their spells, escape techniques, sword techniques, and so on are based on heaven and earth yuan qi. It's said that immortal cultivators' cultivation levels are divided into qi refining, foundation establishment, golden core, nascent soul, and so on. I don't know the specifics, but it seems that there are some legendary realms after that. At this time, Zhang Qingyue interrupted Peng's words and asked, Master, can you tell me specifically what these realms are? Peng thought for a moment and said, I've probably read about it in some secret books. The qi refining stage is where one can draw the world's yuan qi into one's body to refine one's meridians and body, and accumulate one's foundation. Once one reaches a certain level, one will reach the foundation building stage. After reaching the foundation building stage, if one continues to cultivate, a small sphere will form in one's dantian, which is called the golden core. Even if one enters the golden core stage, when one cultivates to a certain level, the golden core will shatter, and a small baby will be born from the golden core. It seems that after reaching the nascent soul realm, you can use the nascent soul to fly and go wherever you want to go. Zhang Qingyue listened and was stunned. He couldn't help but ask, Master, is what you said true? The more I listen, the more it sounds like a story told by my grandmother. Peng laughed and scolded, Qingyue, I'm also your master who taught you martial arts since you were young. When have you seen me beat you up? These are all recorded in the secret books in the sect that are only for the sect leaders' reference. You'll know when you read them in the future. Zhang Qingyue touched his belly and said, Master, isn't the dantian here? I cultivate true qi every day. Why can't I form a golden core and then hatch a nascent soul? Peng didn't explain to him and continued, these 4 immortal cultivators established their own sects and established 4 immortal cultivation sections. They spread their branches and leaves in our world. However, these four immortal cultivators cultivated for many years and were unable to truly become immortals. In the end, they died like cranes, leaving behind only their orthodoxy and opening the path of immortal cultivation. Zhang Qingyue was stunned and said, even the ancestors of immortal cultivation didn't truly cultivate to become immortals. Can this path of immortal cultivation really be walked? Oh Peng said awkwardly, about this, the secret books didn't say whether or not there were people who cultivated to become immortals. I'm not too sure. Soon after, he said with a deep meaning, even if you can't cultivate to become immortals, with the magical ability to overturn rivers and seas and the ability to fly, what's the difference between you and immortals? On this path of immortal cultivation, there are naturally countless people. Zhang Qingyue nodded thoughtfully. Just like practicing martial arts, not everyone could be a top master. However, even the average master was several times stronger than an ordinary man. Naturally, there were many people who wanted to practice martial arts, let alone immortal cultivation. Oh Peng said again, when immortal cultivation was prosperous, there were 4 big immortal cultivation sects in this world. There were also many small sects that split from the 4 big sections. There were even many rogue cultivators who relied on some methods from the 4 big sects to cultivate. According to the records in the secret books, there were often mortals who saw immortal cultivators riding rainbows, white clouds, and flying swords in the sky. Moreover, immortal cultivators also had the temperament of mortals. If there was a conflict, sword chi would be unstoppable, causing mountains to collapse and rivers to flow backward. They were really no different from immortals. That's right, the divine abilities of cultivators are not to be underestimated. They can refine elixirs that can increase one's power, refine weapons that can be used to refine magical weapons, and draw talismans that can gather the chi of heaven and earth into the talismans to achieve a certain effect. These pills were really good stuff. Not only were they useful for humans, they were also useful for some animals with quite a lot of spiritual aura. Occasionally, many animals were also able to obtain pills. The very lucky ones were unexpectedly also able to cultivate. Animals can also cultivate? Zhang Qingyue felt this was inconceivable. Yes, immortal cultivators call them zooists. However, the path of immortal cultivation in our world was too short, so these zooists didn't have too many achievements. Many of them were immortal cultivators' spiritual objects, which were given to them to look at their immortal caves as playthings. In fact, there were not only immortal cultivators and zooists, but also xiaomoists. Xiaomoists? What's the connection between them and the current devil cult? They both have the word devil in their names, so they must be related. However, it's been too long and the records in the secret books are not very detailed, so I can't say for sure. By the way, Master, just now you kept talking about the 4 great immortal cultivation sects. Which 4 sects are they? Oh Peng thought for a while and said, the 4 great immortal cultivation sects are the Incense sect, the Dalan Temple, the Shindao sect, and, at this point, Oh Peng's face was full of pride. The last one is our Misty School. Hearing this, Zhang Qingyue was shocked. Our Misty School is also one of the 4 great immortal cultivation sects with such a powerful background. But, Master, don't tell me you're also an immortal cultivator? Oh Peng said, of course I'm not an immortal cultivator. If I were an immortal cultivator, how could our Misty School still be like this? Zhang Qingyue said, that's right. Since immortal cultivators are so powerful, naturally everyone would go to immortal cultivation sects. How could you also practice martial arts? But why are there only martial arts now and no immortal cultivators? Oh Peng said with a smile, that's the crux of the problem. Immortal cultivation and martial arts can't be mentioned in the same breath. Why is that? Zhang Qingyue thought for a while and said, it's because of the difference in power. Oh Peng shook his head and said, that's because when immortal cultivators ran amok in this world, they didn't have martial arts at all. Ah! Zhang Qingyue was shocked again. Chapter 212. Oh Peng drinks a mouthful of water to moisten his throat. Just now I told you about immortality. Now let's talk about annihilation. As I told you just now, Xiaxianists, Zioists and Xiamoists all use the world's elemental energy as the basis of their practice. It's just that they use different methods and different forms. Our four Xiaxianist sects have existed for who knows how many years. Until 10,000 years ago, for some unknown reason, the world started to change. Not only did the four great Xiaxianist sects notice it, but countless small sects also noticed that the world's elemental energy gradually started to change and become thinner and thinner. The world's elemental energy is the foundation of immortality. Without it, immortality simply cannot exist. Therefore, both Xiaxianists and Xiamoists abandoned their grudges and grievances and joined hands to find the reason why the world's elemental energy became thinner. But after countless people's efforts, they still couldn't find the source. They could only watch as the world's elemental energy became thinner and thinner day by day. In the end, all the world's elemental energy disappeared and immortality was annihilated. Zhang Qingyue is somewhat puzzled. He says, didn't the four Xiaxianist ancestors use that transmission formation to come here and then use it to leave? Oh Peng says smilingly, the Xiaxianists also considered this. But that thing can only be entered but not exited. Moreover, this transmission formation is not easy to build. By the time countless Xiaxianists had done their best to build it, there was no more elemental energy left to use it. The Xiaxianists couldn't cook a meal without rice. They could only stare at this transmission formation helplessly, unable to use it. Alas! Zhang Qingyue is also worried for the ancients. Seeing that they couldn't eat the meat that was right in front of their mouths, they must be very regretful. And then, Master, immortality was annihilated. Shouldn't martial arts come out? Yes. Without the world's elemental energy, Xiaxianists lost their supernatural powers. Naturally, they would think of other ways to make up for it. Martial arts are something that the wise Xiaxianists created based on their Xiaxianist experience. Look at the internal strength mental cultivation method. Many names are the same as those of immortal cultivation, such as meridians, true qi, dantian, and so on. Especially this true qi, it is not inferior to the true qi of immortal cultivation. That is to draw qi into the body, but this one can actually be produced from within the body. Although its power is much weaker, it is still much more powerful than that of ordinary people. Moreover, after tens of thousands of years of perfection, the top experts in martial arts are also comparable to qi practitioners. Of course, the meridians of this internal strength cultivation method are the same as the meridians of immortal cultivators. However, the power of the true qi in the internal strength cultivation method is limited. It can only cultivate the elementary and shallow meridians. It can't cultivate the more profound meridians. Zhang Qingyue thought for a moment and asked, then what about fist techniques, sword techniques, spear techniques, and so on? When O Peng heard this, he couldn't help but smile and said, speaking of fist techniques, there is an interesting story. When I was practicing martial arts with your martial uncle, I accidentally asked about the origin of fist techniques. Your martial ancestor told me that the fist techniques of this world evolved from a set of 360 moves of the great heavenly cycle star fist. It was a set of 360 moves of the great heavenly cycle star fist. An otherworldly expert practiced the fist techniques under a Bodhi tree and taught them to different people. This resulted in the formation of different fist techniques. There are also many sword techniques and spear techniques that evolved from this first set of fist techniques. Actually, at that time, I had a question. Since only that unworldly expert knew the complete set of the great heavenly cycle stellar fist, and the others only wrote bits and pieces, then who knew that the great heavenly cycle stellar fist had 360 moves? Zhang Qingyue suddenly understood. O Peng continued, however, your grandmaster left as soon as he finished telling the story. His ethereal steps was incomparably fast. How could I catch up? Later on, I never had the chance to ask. It was only when I took over the Misty School that I got the real answer from him. Although the Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist wasn't the first set of fist techniques in this world, it was the only set of fist techniques that cultivators didn't use the Yuan Qi of heaven and earth. All of the fights between cultivators used the Yuan Qi of heaven and earth as the foundation. To be able to preserve this set of fist techniques that didn't use the yuan qi of heaven and earth, one can see how precious this set of fist techniques was. Therefore, after the immortal Tao was annihilated, many fist techniques couldn't be used, or had no effect at all. Only the Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist was popular for a period of time, and no other fist could compare to it. However, the Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist was a fist technique of the Shindao sect. After the Shindao sect disappeared, the other sects didn't learn the complete set of fist techniques. Therefore, based on the incomplete Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist, countless fist techniques evolved. At this point, Zhang Qingyue understood and said, "Master, no wonder you valued Zhang Xiaohua so much. Could it be that his set of fist techniques was the Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist?" Ou Peng shook his head and said, "It shouldn't be. The Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist had 360 moves, and his Big Dipper Fist only had 108 moves. However, even if it wasn't the real Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist, the 108 moves inside should be very powerful. There must be some secret within." Zhang Qingyue asked again, "Then what about the other sword techniques and spear techniques?" Ou Peng said, "When cultivators fight, they use swords, sabers, and spears. Those sword techniques, saber techniques, and spear techniques have been passed down. However, these techniques must be combined with the yuan qi of heaven and earth in order to be powerful. Otherwise, they are just empty forms. Therefore, many ambitious cultivators have evolved some of the moves of the Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist into sword techniques, spear techniques, and so on. Therefore, to say that the Great Heavenly Cycle Stellar Fist is the origin of the moves, from a certain point of view, it's also possible. Of course, in the past, it was combined with the yuan qi of heaven and earth to form true qi. Now, it's combined with the true qi formed in one's own meridians. After 10,000 years of evolution, this move has changed a long time ago. No one can say which move is the most correct. What about those senior cultivators? Alas, the foundation of their longevity is the yuan qi of heaven and earth. Without this yuan qi, they are just like ordinary people and will age very quickly. Oh right, it's said that in addition to the yuan qi of heaven and earth, there are also some things like stones condensed from the yuan qi of heaven and earth called yuan stones. In the end, many cultivators rely on yuan stones to extend their lifespans. Master, didn't you just say that since they created the transportation array, they can't use these yuan stones to support it? Ou Peng nodded and said in a gratified manner, "Qingyue, your mind is very sharp. When Master was looking at it, I didn't pay attention. I only saw the records in the secret book and knew that before the immortal Tao was destroyed, the yuan stones contained a lot of yuan qi. They were divided into high-grade, medium-grade, and low-grade yuan stones. However, when the immortal Tao was destroyed, it seemed that these yuan stones couldn't be found at all. The yuan stones collected by the four great sects also disappeared without a trace. Even the low-grade yuan stones were hard to find. All the yuan stones collected by the sects were gathered together, but they weren't enough, so they couldn't use the yuan qi in the yuan stones. As for the yuan stones used by cultivators to extend their lifespans, they were just scraps of the yuan stones that they didn't even look at before. Zhang Qingyue suddenly thought of something and asked, "Master, last time you asked me to get the levitation technique from the Misty School's third-level technique from He Tianshu. Was it a technique used by cultivators?" Ou Peng smiled and said, "That's right. Although the immortal Tao has been annihilated, the immortal Tao techniques have been passed down. Our ethereal sect was one of the four great sects 10,000 years ago. Naturally, we have records of the immortal Tao techniques. This levitation spell is a spell that the immortal cultivators of the past cultivated to allow them to fly around. As for the light body technique that we cultivate, it is a light body technique that was modified by the wise seniors in the sect based on the levitation spell and their inner strength. In fact, 10,000 years ago, many sects' techniques still had traces of the immortal Tao's techniques. However, with the passage of time, these techniques are useless. Without the qi of heaven and earth, no one can practice them. Therefore, they have already been destroyed like the immortal Tao. What's left are only imitations of these techniques. Sigh, thinking about it, we were really frogs in a well before. We thought that what we practiced was invincible in the world. Looking at it now, it's just imitations of the immortal Tao's techniques. How ignorant. Zhang Qingyue sighed. Peng disagreed, times have changed. Without the qi of heaven and earth, cultivators are powerless and can only wait to be destroyed. Now is the era of martial arts. That's right, master. Just now, you seem to be talking to yourself, saying that the world is about to change. What do you mean by that? When Peng heard this question, he immediately became spirited and said, Qingyue, didn't I just say that these 5 forbidden areas were the 5 sacred places of my misty school? In the past, they were places where cultivators kept their things. Outside, they were protected by something called a formation. Those who didn't have the ability to cultivate were unable to enter. The formation of these forbidden areas has been shrinking over the past 10,000 years. This means that the formation's qi of heaven and earth has been decreasing. But today, it's suddenly expanded. It's obvious that it has absorbed the qi of heaven and earth. Since the qi of heaven and earth has appeared, will cultivators also appear? And our Misty School first obtained a part of the De Zhou Tianxing fist, and was the first to know about the appearance of the qi of heaven and earth. Naturally, we have more time to prepare. Perhaps in this world, we can reverse the situation and recreate the glory of 10,000 years ago. Otherwise, we will inevitably be like the Shindao sect and disappear from this world. Actually, do you know? Qingyue, there's another reason, an extremely advantageous factor. Zhang Qingyue was puzzled and said, Master, please enlighten me. It's that secret area. Peng's words woke him up from his dream. Zhang Qingyue shook his head and said, Master, I really didn't think of it. Peng laughed and said, It's not your fault. You don't even know about the way of immortality. In fact, I didn't pay much attention to it the first time. Even when I got the treasures in the secret plane, I didn't think about the immortal path. I just thought it was a relic of a senior in the martial arts world. However, since Lu Yueming failed to explore the jungle for the first time, I suddenly realized that the jungle was an array. This formation is unique to the way of immortality. Chapter 213. Peng continued, since it's something from the way of immortality, it suddenly appeared in Jianghu after thousands of years and was placed in front of our Misty School. This is the biggest opportunity for our Misty School. I believe that Yanming Villa, Wangjianfeng, and the Tan family don't know what kind of opportunity they're facing. The Dalan Temple and the Cult of Fragrance are kept in the dark. This is also the reason why I've been keeping a low profile about this secret plane. As long as we make good use of this secret plane and pay attention to the budding way of immortality, we can bring these resources to the Misty School. Perhaps, in the near future, the Misty School will be able to suppress the Dalan Temple and the Cult of Fragrance. As for the Heavenly Way Union, it's just a product of the way of immortality, a pure martial arts sect. When the qi of heaven and earth is restored, where will their place be in this world? Hearing this, Zhang Qingyue cupped his hands and said, I wish Master's wish to come true. Peng smiled and said, I hope so. Qingyue, this wish can't be realized by me alone. Everyone in the Misty School has to work together. Zhang Qingyue asked again, Master, since you know that the way of immortality is going to be revived, have you already considered cultivating immortal cultivators? Peng smiled bitterly and said, I have the intention to do so, but how can cultivation be so easy? The way of immortality has been destroyed for tens of thousands of years. The way of immortality has long been lost in the long river of history. Moreover, it's said that the way of immortality is protected by the way of immortality. Without great luck and the qi of heaven and earth, it's impossible to obtain these way of immortality. Moreover, the most important thing is that I only have a slight guess. Whether it's correct or not, I don't know. I also don't know how to check the qi of heaven and earth and how to teach those disciples. Although there was still some loneliness, he looked at the empty meeting hall and said, nowadays, all of the internal strength cultivation methods were created for martial arts. the tempering of the meridians should also be extremely different. This body may not be suitable for cultivation. Zhang Qingyue nodded when he heard this. It was obvious that the training of his meridians and body was the path of martial arts. Since it was a simulation of immortal cultivation, it was naturally different from immortal cultivation. From the perspective of martial arts, it would not work even if he changed his sect to practice other inner strength cultivation methods. In other words, immortal cultivation was also impossible. At this time, Peng spoke again. However, this major stellar fist is an exception. It doesn't use true yuan, and it has a special effect on tempering the body. Why do I say that although the number of moves in the Big Dipper magical fist is wrong, do you know why I can conclude that it has a certain connection with the major stellar fist? Zhang Qingyue shook his head blankly and said, Master, I don't know about this. I've never heard you talk about these things. Peng smiled slightly and said, could it be that you didn't notice Yuan Liao and Yuan Kong in the martial arts exhibition arena? Speaking of this, Zhang Qingyue could not help but smile and said, that little monk Yuan Liao is really funny. He pretends to be cultured and his acupoint sealing technique is not good. He even looks like he has a card up his sleeve. He actually stood at the edge of the ring to show off. He only lacks a folding fan to show off. Hee, no wonder he was kicked out of the ring by Zhang Xiaohua. However, I didn't get to see such a refreshing scene. Peng nodded slightly and said, oh, so you didn't see it. I didn't care if you didn't react. Oh right, you watched the match between Yuan Kong and Zhang Xiaohua from the arena. Didn't you find it strange? Strange? Zhang Qingyue frowned slightly and said, Zhang Xiaohua's martial arts are average. He can't combine the Big Dipper magical fist and ethereal steps well, so he lost too many chances to win. However, he has a lot of strength and in the end, he wore down Yuan Kong until he surrendered. Oh, right, Master, now that you mention it, I really do remember. That monk Yuan Kong seemed to have sealed Zhang Xiaohua's acupoints and even injured his fingers. I understand what you mean. It seems that little monk Yuan Liao's acupoint sealing technique is not simple. It's not that we disciples think that he didn't succeed and that his acupoint sealing technique was crooked, but, at this point, Zhang Qingyue's eyes were filled with astonishment and said, so, Zhang Xiaohua is actually not afraid of being sealed? The only reason he isn't afraid of being sealed is because of the Big Dipper magical fist. He only knows this fist technique. It's said that his second brother found him a set of Spirit of the Bull. He has just gained a sense of qi. With just his internal strength cultivation, it's impossible for him to withstand Yuan Liao's acupoint sealing. Hearing this, Peng nodded happily and said, Qingyue, your analysis is correct. That's right. For the Big Dipper magical fist to have such an effect, I can't help but suspect that it has something to do with the major stellar fist. After all, it's reasonable that martial arts can't affect the acupoints trained by the immortal fist technique. This is also the specialty of the major stellar fist. Actually, there's another point. Zhang Xiaohua can cultivate the Big Dipper magical fist and Spirit of the Bull together. This is enough to prove that this fist technique can be carried forward by our Misty School. Otherwise, no matter how miraculous this fist technique is, it's useless to us. Zhang Qingyue was a little puzzled and said, but the origin of the Big Dipper magical fist is still hard to understand? Peng nodded and said, indeed, according to our thoughts, he might have obtained the Godly Knife Faction's fist manual to be able to successfully cultivate it. However, if he really obtained the Stellar Fist manual, there should be 360 moves. Even if Zhang Xiaohua's aptitude is low, it's impossible for him to only learn 108 moves. Furthermore, the fist arts moves are linked together flexibly, without the slightest feeling of piecing together. Moreover, I've also sent people to investigate. Zhang Xiaohua's words are all true. Sigh, I can only say that this guy's life is too good. He can actually learn a miraculous fist technique while he's recuperating. Hearing this, Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, it's not Zhang Xiaohua's life that is good, it's Master's life that is good. This Zhang Xiaohua is clearly a gift from the heavens. Otherwise, with his poor aptitude, How could he learn a fist technique by himself? Oh Peng laughed and said, "It's our Misty School's life that is good." Zhang Qingyue also smiled and said, "Yes, our Misty School's life is good." After the two laughed heartily, Zhang Qingyue asked again, "This disciple will go to the pharmacy hall tomorrow to find Zhang Xiaohua. I'll definitely record the Big Dipper Magical Fists manual as soon as possible. However, this Zhang Xiaohua's value is so high, Oh Peng thought for a moment and said, "As I said, we'll deal with it in a low-key manner. If we pay too much attention to Zhang Xiaohua or do anything, it'll easily attract the attention of the Dalan Temple and Xuanxiang cult. Anyway, he's been in Huanxi Manor all this time, and he's recently been fascinated by the pharmacy hall. We'll give him this privilege. Isn't this pushing the boat along the current?" Zhang Qingyue said, "Master is wise. However, Zhang Xiaohua seems to want a manual. Should we return it to him?" Oh Peng thought for a moment and said, "Give it to him. After all, I've already promised him. However, you should remind him a little. He should understand. This kid has improved a lot since he came to Pingyang City. Don't underestimate him." Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, "Master, don't worry. Just because he's the mascot of our Misty School, I'll treat him well." Oh Peng heard this and laughed loudly. The two of them talked for the whole night. It was already late at night, and Zhang Xiaohua was already sleeping cross-legged. Who would have thought that the sect leader he admired the most had already schemed against him? The next morning, Zhang Xiaohua woke up. He didn't get up immediately. Instead, he released his perception to feel the heaven and earth essence energy in the outside world. He then got up gloomily. After a night of cultivation, the heaven and earth essence energy in the outside world had become much thinner. If he continued to cultivate like this, it wouldn't take long for him to finish absorbing the heaven and earth essence energy. By then, all the herbs in the pharmacy hall would wither and die. Zhang Xiaohua would definitely not do something that would attract attention and kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. However, since he couldn't absorb the heaven and earth essence energy in the pharmacy hall for a long time, how was he going to continue on his cultivation path? Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. Was there an abundance of heaven and earth essence energy in the forbidden area? However, when he thought of the terrifying place that had swallowed a Misty School disciple, Zhang Xiaohua immediately shrunk his neck. Only when he was alive could he cultivate his inner strength. Without his life, everything would be nonsense. Moreover, he still had his parents, eldest brother, and second brother in the Guizhuang house. He wouldn't be stupid enough to take that risk. After thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua stretched his back and walked out of the door. He didn't know how his second brother was doing. Hero Wen had taught him inner strength, so he didn't know how he was doing now. As soon as he walked out of the pharmacy hall, he saw Zhang Qingyue walking quickly towards him. Zhang Xiaohua quickly bowed. Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, why are you up so early?" Zhang Xiaohua giggled and said, "Master Zhang, the ancients said that people would dance when they hear the rooster. Although our Misty School doesn't have roosters crowing, I should follow the ancients' example." Zhang Qingyue gave him a thumbs up and said, "Heroes come from the young. We're all old." Zhang Xiaohua secretly curled his lips and thought, to be able to meet him so early, it must be the weasel paying a New Year's greeting to the chicken. Then he said, "Master Zhang, you go about your business. I still have to hurry to find my second brother and see how he's doing with his martial arts." Zhang Qingyue waved his hand and said with a smile, "There's no need to go. Zhang Xiaohu is at Wen Wenhai's place right now. He didn't even return to his own courtyard. It's useless for you to go." Without waiting for him to finish, Zhang Xiaohua said, Then can you tell me where Hero Wen is?" Zhang Qingyue said, "Zhang Xiaohua, don't play any tricks. You can't go to Wen Wenhai's courtyard. Besides, do you think I saw you by chance? I'm looking for you." Zhang Xiaohua secretly laughed, "The fox's tail is finally showing." She said, "What's the matter, Master Zhang?" Zhang Qingyue took out a banknote and a command tablet from his pocket and handed them to Zhang Xiaohua, saying, "This is what the big clan leader promised you. Take it. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed and reached out to take the banknotes. First, he looked at the simple command tablet. It was the same style as the one Xue Qing gave to their family, but it was bigger and the pattern was more complicated. Only the two characters, Misty, were the same, and behind the command tablet was a large O character. Chapter 214. After looking at the token, Zhang Xiaohua casually put it into her bosom. Then, she carefully looked at the banknote with 1,000 taels written on it. After looking at it for a long time, she took out a small money bag from her bosom and carefully folded the banknote into it. But just as she was about to put away the money bag, Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something and took out the banknote again, saying, "Marshal Uncle Zhang, do you think you can exchange this banknote for 50 taels each?" "Of course, if it's 10 taels each, that would be even better." Zhang Qingyue was stunned and said, "Why do you need so many small banknotes? Isn't it convenient to hold this one?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, "Think about it, if a country boy like me went to the bank with 1,000 taels of banknotes, would they exchange it for me?" Zhang Qingyue looked up and down at Zhang Xiaohua and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, I really underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be so meticulous. Alright, you take it first. When we go back, I'll find the accountant to exchange it for you." However, before he finished speaking, Zhang Xiaohua repeatedly waved her hand and said, "Don't, Marshal Uncle Zhang. This matter doesn't need to trouble two people. You see, you can do it for me now, so that I won't keep thinking about it. Moreover, I don't know where the accountant is. Even if I go, they may not pay attention to me." Zhang Qingyue smiled bitterly and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, you really want to exchange it now?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled apologetically and said, "Marshal Uncle Zhang, please do me a favor and quickly exchange it for me. Otherwise, I can't do anything well." Zhang Qingyue was helpless. The words, "can't do anything well," had already been said. What else could he do? He could only say, "Let's go, follow me." After saying that, he ignored Zhang Xiaohua and Zhang Xiaohua's banknotes and turned to leave. Seeing Zhang Qingyue agree, Zhang Xiaohua didn't care about his attitude and followed him with a smile. Changing a banknote worth 1,000 taels into 100 banknotes worth 10 taels was something that the accountant hated. However, with Zhang Qingyue around, who would dare to do anything about it? Zhang Xiaohua's money pouch couldn't hold it anymore. As long as she kept it in her arms, she would touch it carefully, as if she was afraid that the banknotes would grow wings and fly away if she wasn't careful. Zhang Qingyue looked at Zhang Xiaohua's worried look with amusement and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, Grand Master has finished what he promised you. When will you start what you promised him?" Zhang Xiaohua habitually pinched the soft stack of paper in her arms and said with a smile, "Since Grand Master is so straightforward, I won't be a petty person who refuses. I'll be at your beck and call. I'll start whenever you want." Zhang Qingyue nodded with satisfaction and said, "You're quite tactful. Alright, let's record the fist manual now. Grand Master wants to see how powerful your Big Dipper magical fist is." Zhang Xiaohua naturally agreed. Then, Zhang Qingyue led Zhang Xiaohua in a direction. Zhang Xiaohua took a few steps and quickly asked, "Marshal Uncle Zhang, where are we going?" Zhang Qingyue said, "To my residence." Zhang Xiaohua probed, "Let's go to the guest room in the pharmacy hall." "What do you think?" Zhang Qingyue said firmly, "No, there are too many people there. It'll affect us." "No, the guest room is very quiet. It doesn't seem like anyone is staying there." Zhang Qingyue knew that Zhang Xiaohua didn't know the value of his fist technique. But he was instructed by O Peng and didn't intend to point it out. He only shook his head and said, "The guest room in the pharmacy hall can let the pharmacy hall's disciples enter and leave at any time. It will affect my recording. No one will go to my residence. It's quiet there." Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded and said, "Marshal Uncle Zhang, don't tell me you're going to record the fist manual for me personally?" Zhang Qingyue nodded. Zhang Xiaohua immediately understood a lot of the meaning. But she still probed, "You're busy with many things. Why don't you let someone else do it? Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, this is Grand Master's personal appointment. Do you understand? Zhang Xiaohua's expression changed slightly and nodded. Then she said, but, is your level parallel? Could it be wrong? In front of him, Zhang Qingyue almost fell and said unhappily, the entire Misty School's top-secret fist manual was copied by me. Do you think I'll record it wrongly? Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to speak again. But in her heart, she secretly said, the Arhat fist brought by Li Jinfeng is different from the Lotus Escort Agency's Arhat fist. Who knows if you'll copy it wrongly? Of course, she didn't dare to say this out loud. The two walked for a long time and arrived at a quiet place. This was a small courtyard that looked very unique. But when they pushed open the courtyard door, Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded. How was this a small courtyard? There were pavilions, lotus ponds and corridors. Occasionally, there were some children walking back and forth. When these children saw Zhang Qingyue, they hurriedly lowered their heads and bowed, staying far away. Zhang Xiaohua fiercely asked, Martial Uncle Zhang, this is your small courtyard? This is the quiet you mentioned? Zhang Qingyue shrugged and said, that's right. This is my small courtyard. It's also where sect leader O lived before. It's also where the previous sect leader's eldest disciple lived. Zhang Xiaohua was helpless. This small courtyard looked ordinary from the outside, but after entering, with a glance, it was even bigger than her Guizhuang house. This Zhang Qingyue still had the nerve to call it a small courtyard. Zhang Qingyue looked at Zhang Xiaohua and led the way through the corridors, across the lotus pond, and arrived at a real small courtyard. Pushing open the door and entering, there were two delicate and pretty girls. They hurriedly bowed and said, young master is back. Zhang Qingyue waved his hand and said, you can leave. Without my call, don't come in. Also, pass down the order. If I don't leave this courtyard, forbid the children. Saying this, he suddenly thought of something and changed his words, oh, forget it. Brew me some good tea and send it over. After that, go do your own things. The two girls didn't dare to say anything. After bowing, they left. Not long after, a pot of brewed tea was brought over and poured for the two of them. Zhang Xiaohua also hadn't drunk good tea for a long time. Seeing such a good opportunity, she didn't refuse and carefully took a sip. However, in her heart, she immediately thought, this tea is far worse than the Guizhuang house. However, compared to what I usually drink, it's really more fragrant. Zhang Qingyue asked proudly, Zhang Xiaohua, what do you think of this tea? It's the best Yuqian Longjing tea. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know anything about tea, so she could only say, I don't know about this. I just feel that it's very fragrant. Zhang Qingyue shook his head and didn't say anything else. He focused on drinking the tea. Zhang Xiaohua knew that he didn't want to talk to her, so she drank the tea. Anyway, he was the one who had something to tell her, so she just needed to wait for his instructions. Sure enough, after a while, Zhang Qingyue asked, Zhang Xiaohua, are you ready? Let's start. Zhang Xiaohua nodded, then looked around and said, yes, do we have to do it here? Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, we definitely can't do it here. Come, follow me. With that said, he led Zhang Xiaohua to a room with many bookshelves and books. It was probably a study. Zhang Qingyue walked behind a bookshelf and rummaged for something. With a creaking sound, the third bookshelf moved a little to the side, revealing a dark hole in the ground where it used to be. Zhang Qingyue looked at Zhang Xiaohua and gestured to her. Then, he took out a torch and lit it. He walked to the hole and walked down the stairs that were illuminated by the light. When Zhang Xiaohua saw this, she didn't dare to be negligent. She looked around reflexively and followed him down. At the bottom of the hole was a flight of stairs. There were oil lamps hanging on the stone walls on both sides of the stairs. Zhang Qingyue walked all the way and used the torch to light them. When he reached a place, Zhang Qingyue moved another place. There was a sound above his head. With a creak, the bookshelf returned to its original state. When they walked down the stairs, Zhang Qingyue lit up the surrounding oil lamps and torches. Zhang Xiaohua saw that this was a basement about the size of 2 to 3 rooms. Zhang Xiaohua had been catching field mice and counting ants since she was young. She was very interested in such underground structures. Now that she saw it, she couldn't help but look around with a face full of curiosity. Zhang Qingyue ignored him and walked straight to the back of a desk. After tidying it up a little, he said, "Zhang Xiaohua, this is my private training ground. It's the place where I'm going to record the fist manual for you. Are you satisfied?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at the weapon rack in the corner and said with a smile, "I can't say that I'm satisfied. I'm just surprised. I didn't think that you would put in so much effort just to record a fist technique. I'm flattered." Zhang Qingyue laughed a few times and said, "I'm ready. What about you? Can we start now?" Zhang Xiaohua said indifferently, "I can do it any time. I usually practice in the forest. There's nothing taboo." Zhang Qingyue was a little surprised and asked, "You don't usually practice with Yi Tianshu and the others?" Zhang Xiaohua said embarrassedly, "No, I'm afraid that they will say that I'm practicing wrongly. I'm embarrassed to be with them." Zhang Qingyue said happily, "That's good. You don't have to be with them in the future. When you practice this fist technique, avoid people at the end." Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, "Why is that?" Zhang Qingyue thought for a moment and said, "Since you've already recorded a fist technique, our Misty School will keep it. If you practice as you wish and others see it, what's the point of keeping this fist technique?" Zhang Xiaohua was not too happy and said, "Practicing is my freedom. You can't take it away." Zhang Qingyue smiled and said, "We're not restricting you from practicing. We just want you to choose a place when you practice. Otherwise, those 100 silver notes." Zhang Xiaohua heard and quickly said, I know. Anyway, I used to avoid people when I practiced. I'll do it again in the future." Zhang Qingyue said, "That's good. Let's start." Zhang Qingyue knew that Zhang Xiaohua did not know how to record a fist technique, so he said, "First, practice the fist of the North Star from beginning to end." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "1 time is too little. I'll do it 7 times. Chapter 2:15. The clear sky was a little gloomy at this moment. The sun in the middle of the sky was not strong, and the delicate sunlight shone on the lotus pond. It was especially enchanting and indescribably refreshing. A gentle breeze blew, and the lotus leaves swayed, causing ripples to appear on the calm surface of the water. If Zhang Xiaohua was here, she would definitely like such a beautiful scenery. Unfortunately, on such a beautiful day, he was below the beautiful scenery. Zhang Xiaohua asked Zhang Qingyue. Zhang Qingyue did not comment. He only sat quietly behind the desk, as if he was tired of Zhang Xiaohua talking too much. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua did not say anything more. She gathered her spirit and practiced the fist of the North Star from beginning to end in this somewhat dark but brightly lit martial arts training field. Zhang Xiaohua practiced this fist of the North Star dozens of times every day, so she was naturally very familiar with it. The 108 moves were displayed with vigor and vigor. As the ancients said, phoenixes were born from fire, and people could only grow through battle. This fist of the North Star that had been baptized by the martial arts exhibition was not comparable to the fist of the North Star from a few days ago. When Zhang Xiaohua displayed the fist technique at this time, it felt as if the fist was born from the heart. Every move was extremely natural, and the connection of the moves was like flowing water, without the slightest bit of sluggishness. In fact, vigor and vigor was only used to describe the momentum of Zhang Xiaohua's fist technique. It really felt like the ancestor of all fists, looking down on all living things. But the real move did not emit the slightest bit of wind or force. Any force was hidden in the fist technique, just like a tiger that was accumulating strength. It did not look ferocious, but as long as someone provoked it, it would show its ferocity. Zhang Qingyue was naturally an expert in fist techniques. Although he did not care about this fist technique that did not have the support of internal strength, he already knew the extraordinary origin of this fist technique. When he looked at it carefully, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Not to mention the moves of this fist technique, just the fist force that Zhang Xiaohua displayed was definitely not to be underestimated. However, it was still difficult for Zhang Qingyue. After all, he had been practicing martial arts for many years. What Arhat fist, Erlang fist, etc. He had learned some of them before, while he only knew the moves for some of them. However, he was an outstanding talent of his time, and these fist moves had long been imprinted in his mind. The moves of Zhang Xiaohua's set of fist moves were very different from the moves in his memory. If they were completely different, it would be easy to explain, as he could just memorize them again. However, these moves just happened to have different angles and directions. They were just a hair's breadth away from what he remembered. It was not easy to memorize such moves. Therefore, after Zhang Xiaohua played twice, Zhang Qingyue had no choice but to ask her to slow down and play slowly. Zhang Xiaohua naturally did not mind. Anyway, he did not care about the speed of the fist technique. When he reached the 7th time, there would definitely be a warm current. Therefore, he really slowed down and performed it bit by bit. After watching it a few more times, Zhang Qingyue said, "Zhang Xiaohua, stop. I'll think about it for a while and then prepare to copy it." Zhang Xiaohua counted in her heart. This was only the 5th time, and there were still 2 more times to go. She said, "I'm not tired. Master Uncle Zhang, please watch it 2 more times." Then, she performed it for the 6th time. Who would have thought that just as Zhang Xiaohua performed it for the 6th time, the warm current immediately rose from her feet. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be happy. It seemed that her fist of the North Star had reached another level. As this time was also slow, the warm current flowed through the bones in her body slowly. Zhang Xiaohua felt that her whole body was burdened. Opposite her, Zhang Qingyue also felt that Zhang Xiaohua's aura was more dignified. It was as if there was a mountain in front of her, making her feel stifled and unable to vent her anger. Until Zhang Xiaohua stopped, the two were still immersed in the feeling just now. Zhang Xiaohua thought, why didn't I think that the fist of the North Star could have such a magical effect if it was performed very slowly? Zhang Qingyue thought, the ancestor of all fists is indeed extraordinary. Just a young man like Zhang Xiaohua who has just entered the sect can produce such an aura. If I, or sect leader O, were to perform it personally, what would the situation be like? Thinking about it made his heart burn. He couldn't wait to finish copying it and study it carefully. However, it was also because of the uniqueness of these fist techniques that he did not dare to write it down immediately. After carefully recalling it in his mind, he walked out from behind the document and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, I've seen you perform it 6 times. Now I'll perform it once. What do you think?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Master Uncle Zhang's aptitude is naturally extraordinary. You can perform this fist technique after watching it a few times. I'm looking forward to it." Thus, Zhang Xiaohua stood on the side and Zhang Qingyue performed it. It must be said that Zhang Qingyue was indeed extraordinary. He was actually able to break through the usual shackles in a very short period of time. He was able to connect the different fist techniques together and perform it once. However, in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes, Zhang Qingyue's first few moves were pleasing to the eye, but the later ones were particularly uncomfortable. However, if she asked him to point out the shortcomings, he would not be able to do it. After Zhang Qingyue performed it with great difficulty, he stopped and looked at Zhang Xiaohua eagerly, waiting for his affirmation. Zhang Xiaohua did not know whether to praise or criticize him. She could only clap her hands and say, "Master Uncle Zhang, you're amazing." Then, she scratched her head and said, "However, I don't know if you performed it correctly. I'd better perform it for you again." After saying that, she was about to start when Zhang Qingyue stopped her and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, that is to say, you don't know if the fist techniques I performed are correct or not." Zhang Xiaohua said awkwardly, "Well, Master Uncle Zhang, I only know how to perform boxing. Many of the fist techniques you performed made me uncomfortable. As for whether they were correct or not, I really don't know." Zhang Qingyue was helpless. It was rare to meet such a person who only knew how to perform boxing, but when others learned from him, he did not know if others were correct. Zhang Qingyue thought for a moment and said, "How about this? You perform a move first. I'll record it and compare it myself." Zhang Xiaohua was naturally happy that she did not need to worry about it. She first performed a few moves and waited there. Zhang Qingyue watched and closed his eyes to think for a while before he started to sketch and make notes at the side. After he finished recording a move, he let Zhang Xiaohua perform a few more moves. After recording 10 moves, Zhang Qingyue threw the pen to the side in exhaustion and said, "All right, let's stop here for today. Why is it so tiring to copy this move of yours compared to copying other fist techniques?" Zhang Xiaohua shrugged, indicating that it had nothing to do with her. Then, she walked over and said, "Master Uncle Zhang, can I see the moves you recorded?" Zhang Qingyue waved his hand and said, "Pick it up and take a look. This is the result of our hard work today. Please give me your valuable opinions." In his opinion, since Zhang Xiaohua could not tell if his moves were good or bad, he might not be able to tell if the fist manual was placed there. He could only wait for him to finish recording it and match it with Zhang Xiaohua's moves to correct the mistakes. Zhang Xiaohua picked up the fist manual and looked at the detailed records on it. The graphics were lifelike and she could not help but praise, "Master Uncle Zhang is indeed a professional." However, after looking at it a few more times and comparing the moves in the fist manual with the person in her mind, she found something wrong. Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "Master Uncle Zhang, look here. Shouldn't it be like this?" Then, she pointed at a place in the fist manual and performed it herself. Zhang Qingyue took a look and slapped his forehead, saying, "Io, it's really empiricism." After Zhang Qingyue corrected it, Zhang Xiaohua actually found a lot of mistakes in it. Zhang Qingyue was a little embarrassed. He had just patted his chest and guaranteed that there was no problem, but now there were a lot of mistakes. This was a matter of face. In fact, he could not be blamed. It was a fist technique that he was familiar with. If he changed it a little all of a sudden, it would be a problem no matter how he recorded it. Zhang Qingyue honestly corrected it according to Zhang Xiaohua's instructions. Then, he asked in surprise, "Zhang Xiaohua, why can't you find any mistakes in my fist technique, but you can find the moves I recorded?" Zhang Xiaohua chuckled and said, "I don't know why. I just know that I can find them." What kind of answer was that? It was already afternoon when they came out of the underground training field. Zhang Qingyue arranged for Zhang Xiaohua to rest in a small courtyard nearby so that she could continue recording tomorrow. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to see her second brother, Zhang Xiaohu, but how could Zhang Qingyue agree? If he did not record the Fist of the North Star in the Fist Manual, he would not be at ease letting Zhang Xiaohua wander around the Misty School. However, the guest room in Zhang Qingyue's courtyard was much better than the one in the pharmacy. Not only was the room big and well decorated, there were even a few young ladies waiting on the side. Zhang Xiaohua had never experienced such a situation before. She quickly asked Zhang Qingyue to send these people away before he left. After eating a few fruits, Zhang Xiaohua practiced the Fist of the North Star dozens of times in this quiet and beautiful courtyard to complete his homework for the day. What was special was that when the warm current appeared, he deliberately practiced the fist technique very slowly so that he could truly feel the seriousness of the bone honing. Sure enough, when the warm current of the 9-time bone honing passed, although Zhang Xiaohua could not clearly feel the difference, he had a slight understanding in his heart. The warm current of the bone honing was different from the true qi in the meridians. It had to be slow, just like drinking water and drinking tea. Drinking water had to be done quickly to quench thirst, while drinking tea had to be done slowly. Different martial arts required different execution methods and speeds. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua thought of the sword in his left hand. Wasn't it the same for the 16 changes? Some changes had to be fast so that he could be caught off guard and hit. Some changes had to be slow so that when the changes in the sword's momentum and the body's movements were no longer changeable, it would be like a dormant poisonous snake that could not be avoided. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but feel the itch to practice. He reached out his hand and took out the small sword. Sometimes it was fast, sometimes it was slow, and sometimes it was slow. The speed of the slow and the fast of the sword was exquisite to experience the changes in the sword moves. Alas, poor Zhang Xiaohua. Such a simple principle, if it was a formal education, would have been recorded on paper long ago. Why would he need to wait until now to understand such a simple principle? It is indeed difficult to become a talent through self-learning. Chapter 2:16. However, everyone's fate was not decided by him alone. Although Zhang Xiaohua seemed to have a lot of opportunities to get guidance from He Tianshu from the Misty School, this was the post-immortal cultivation era. Zhang Xiaohua was destined to walk a path that had been annihilated 10,000 years ago. No one in this world could give him a pointer or two. All the paths could only be walked by his own feet. He could only rely on those mental cultivation methods of the immortal Tao, but these mental cultivation methods did not keep up with the times. The environment had changed, and martial arts were flourishing. Where was the path of the immortal Tao? Zhang Xiaohua naturally didn't know. He was only happy that he could sense qi and have the thickness of cotton thread. Zhang Qingyue's small courtyard was so quiet. How could Zhang Xiaohua be willing to let go of such a good opportunity to cultivate? He just didn't know if the qi of heaven and earth here was the same as second brothers. When he released his perception, he let out a groan in his heart. How could he live like this? The concentration of the qi of heaven and earth in this small courtyard was actually not inferior to the medicinal hall. In Zhang Xiaohua's impression, the qi of heaven and earth should be related to medicinal herbs. The denser the medicinal herbs were, the richer the qi of heaven and earth. However, when he thought about how he didn't see any medicinal herbs along the way, how could he explain this? However, he liked the richness of the qi of heaven and earth. What did the source of the qi of heaven and earth have to do with him? It was drifting between heaven and earth. Why should he care about the source? After making up his mind, Zhang Xiaohua calmed down and absorbed the qi of heaven and earth step by step. The night was silent. The next day, Zhang Qingyue came to find him early in the morning. Looking at Zhang Qingyue's refreshed appearance, yesterday's exhaustion had long disappeared. In fact, don't look at it as a simple boxing manual. It required all the other people's moves to be accurately recorded. The movements of the moves also had to be recorded in words. It was not a very simple thing. Fortunately, Zhang Qingyue often copied boxing manuals and accumulated a lot of experience, so it was easy to learn. However, Zhang Qingyue had only copied before after all, and there was no new record. It was also difficult for him to do this. But then again, the matter of recording a fist technique manual was rare in the martial arts world. How could a set of fist techniques be born so easily and let people record it every day? Most of the people also copied their experiences. The task of recording the fist manual should have been done by the specially trained disciples of the Misty School. However, the implications of the fist of the North Star were too great. Peng didn't dare to let others do it, so he let Zhang Qingyue do it personally. Fortunately, Zhang Qingyue and Zhang Xiaohua already had the experience of the first day. As the ancients said, the first time you are unfamiliar, the second time you are familiar, and the third time you can be a master. It was much easier for the two of them to work together again. However, according to Zhang Qingyue's idea, in the beginning, as long as Zhang Xiaohua practiced the moves one by one, she could stop at any time. Who knew that Zhang Xiaohua used the excuse that her hands and feet were stiff, and she had to work hard 6 times before she stopped. The 6 times were actually very slow, which made Zhang Qingyue very angry. However, even so, 20 moves were recorded on the second day. After Zhang Xiaohua checked and corrected some mistakes, the two of them stopped. Zhang Qingyue still blushed a little. Back in the guest room, when Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged to practice, she was surprised to find that she had absorbed a lot of spirit of the world last night. Today, she found that the spirit of the world in the guest room did not reduce much. It was much better than the pharmacy hall. She couldn't help but be more emotional. Presumably, this Misty School's eldest disciple's living place was a place where spirit gathered. There must be a mystery. If she was fated to stay for a long time, wouldn't she be able to practice every day? She wouldn't be afraid to absorb it like in Huanxi Villa, and she wouldn't have to absorb it carefully like in the pharmacy hall. Immediately, Zhang Xiaohua's little head spun quickly, thinking about whether she should ask O Peng to exchange for a token. Thus, the recording of the fist manual that had been on the right track was slowed down by Zhang Xiaohua's selfishness. Every day, Zhang Xiaohua's practice of the fist manual was slow, and the revision was slow as well. She only recorded a dozen moves a day. She wanted to stay with Zhang Qingyue for a while, but Zhang Qingyue was not happy. Every time she finished copying, she would report to O Peng and let O Peng refer to the fist manual. O Peng saw that the results were bleak, so naturally, he was quite dissatisfied. It had been 3 days, and she had only copied less than half of the moves. Therefore, under Zhang Qingyue's careful observation, on the 4th day, he directly asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, how are you living in my small courtyard?" "It's really good. I'm so happy that I don't want to go home." "Are you satisfied with my hospitality?" "Very satisfied." "Then, do you have any thoughts about it?" "Thoughts? I don't dare, eldest Master Zhang. If you have something to say, just say it." Seeing this, Zhang Qingyue said, "If you don't have any objections, I'll be frank. On the first day, we recorded 10 moves. It's pardonable. It's the first time we worked together, so we didn't have a good rapport. On the second day, we recorded 20 moves. On the third day, why did we only record a dozen moves? I believe that I'm getting more and more proficient at recording. Why is your fist technique getting slower and slower?" This. Zhang Xiaohua looked like a thief who had been caught stealing. Her expression was very unnatural. Zhang Qingyue rolled his eyes and said with a smile, "Zhang Xiaohua, have you taken a fancy to the girl here? If you're willing, tell me. I can give her to you. You're already at the age of yearning for love. I can understand." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua almost fell down. She hurriedly said with a red face, "Eldest Master Zhang, what are you saying? Aren't you tarnishing my pure heart? I just feel that life here is very comfortable, and I want to enjoy more of your leisure life here." "That's it?" Zhang Qingyue couldn't believe it. "That's it, really? Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." Zhang Qingyue clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Isn't that easy? After you finish recording the fist technique, you can stay here for a few more days." "That's fine, isn't it?" "Really? Really? That's great. But can I come more often in the future?" Zhang Qingyue also staggered and almost fell down. Who would talk about conditions with someone like that? He even wanted to come to someone's house more often. There were only a few beautiful girls in his house. Was he really going to be targeted by him? Zhang Qingyue said with a smile, "Actually, Zhang Xiaohua, with the token that Boss O gave you, you can go to most of the places in the Misty School. But this is the main place of the head disciple. It's really inconvenient for you to come here more often." Zhang Xiaohua's eyes lit up when she heard that. She said, "Then as long as it's not a forbidden area, can I stay at your key places?" Zhang Qingyue thought for a moment and said, "Then you have to talk to Boss O first. After all, you're not a disciple of the Misty School." Zhang Xiaohua was a little disappointed. However, since she had not found a better place to cultivate, she could only talk about it at the pharmacy hall. She would wait until she found a place that was not under anyone's jurisdiction and where she could cultivate. Since Zhang Qingyue promised Zhang Xiaohua to stay here for a while, Zhang Xiaohua did not hold back when recording the fist technique. The two of them quickly finished recording in a few days. Looking at the thin stack of paper, Zhang Qingyue was very emotional. It was really not easy. He had changed the moves that he was familiar with into a mess and still had to think that it was correct. He did not know how to train in the future. After Zhang Xiaohua looked through it from beginning to end, there were actually 2 flaws in it. Zhang Xiaohua was completely speechless about this method of using pen and ink to record the moves. There were so many mistakes even when she was recording it face to face. What about when she copied it in the future? It was no wonder that countless fist techniques had been lost and changed. Zhang Qingyue took the fist technique that Zhang Xiaohua had changed over and over again and happily went to find Boss O. Leaving behind Zhang Xiaohua, she was also happily absorbed the qi of heaven and earth. Everyone was happy. Not to mention, Zhang Xiaohua seized the time to absorb the qi into her body and strengthen her vital qi that was still in its seedling state. Ou Peng was also overjoyed when he received Zhang Qingyue's Big Dipper Magical Fist Technique Manual. He carefully looked through it from beginning to end and closed his eyes. He silently thought about the moves that he had memorized in the past few days from beginning to end. Only then did he leave his seat and perform it in the empty meeting hall. Ou Peng's skills could be said to have been immersed in martial arts for dozens of years. He could pick up any fist technique and perform it well. However, when he performed this Big Dipper magical fist, it was rather awkward. He could not help but ask, "Qingyue, have you performed it before? How did it feel?" Zhang Qingyue said, "I've performed it many times. However, Boss O, this fist technique is indeed a little strange. When I first started practicing it, I felt a little stuffy in my chest when I performed it without inner strength. It was not carefree. If I used a little inner strength, my inner breath would be a little chaotic and I would not dare to continue. However, after this disciple's study and cultivation, I realized that as long as I wholeheartedly practiced the fist technique, I would be able to complete it from beginning to end even if it was not my own inner strength." Ou Peng said gloomily, "But our martial arts are all based on inner strength. If this fist technique is purely without inner strength, only people like Zhang Xiaohua who are born with divine strength can use it. Wouldn't it be a waste of time for others to watch?" Zhang Qingyue said, "But Zhang Xiaohua is also practicing inner strength. When I saw him in my guest room, he was also sitting cross-legged and cultivating inner strength. Since he can practice it, our disciples should also be able to practice it. At worst, our disciples who have already achieved inner strength will not practice it." Ou Peng also said, "That's right. Inner strength is not something that can be learned halfway. You should also ponder over it a little. Don't put all your energy into it. Our Misty School has thousands of martial arts inheritances. They are also very valuable. Also, don't do stupid things like picking up sesame seeds and throwing away watermelons." Zhang Qingyue bowed and said, "Thank you, Master, for your guidance. As the saying goes, there is no end to learning, but there is a limit to my life. As long as I practice my current martial arts to the peak, I will also be able to leave my name in Jianghu. I will not think too much about it." Ou Peng nodded and said, "Then pick a disciple from Kitty Hawk Hall and practice this Big Dipper magical fist first." Zhang Qingyue said somewhat awkwardly, "The disciples of Kitty Hawk Hall have already been initiated. If they practice something else, I'm afraid it won't be appropriate. Also, our Misty School still hasn't picked a suitable new child." Hearing this, Ou Peng said, "I have a good candidate in mind." Chapter 217. Zhang Qingyue thought for a while but still had no clue. He said, "Please enlighten me." Ou Peng said with a smile, "Although we didn't select any new disciples this year, it doesn't mean that there aren't any new children with good aptitude." Zhang Qingyue's eyes lit up when he heard that. He said with a smile, "So you're talking about Deputy Gang Leader Shui's son, Shui Tian. You're really far-sighted. I'm not as good as you." Ou Peng waved his hand and said, "Nothing else. You're just thinking about the new disciples." However, Zhang Qingyue was still worried and said, "But Sect Master, Vice Sect Master Shui has high hopes for his son and is extremely picky when it comes to martial arts. Sect Master has promised to teach him the martial arts of our Misty Sect. I'm afraid Vice Sect Master Shui might not agree." Ou Peng said with a smile, "Everyone knows the difference between the way of immortality and the way of martial arts. Not to mention that Shui Yupeng doesn't know the details. Even if we tell him the situation, he will be happy. How can he have any opinions?" Moreover, the Big Dipper magical fist is obviously the inheritance of immortality for 10,000 years. Our Misty School is one of the 4 major immortal cultivation sects 10,000 years ago. It's not wrong to say that it's our inheritance. Besides, the Big Dipper magical fist is so mysterious that it's naturally not tainted Shui Tiantian's aptitude. It's a blessing for Deputy Gang Leader Shui. Zhang Qingyue nodded and said, "You're right. Deputy Gang Leader Shui will be grateful to you." "Well," Peng said, "it's settled then. Find a time to take Shui Tiantian in and teach him the Big Dipper magical fist first. There's no need to rush to teach him the internal strength. It won't be too late to teach him after the Big Dipper magical fist is effective." He paused for a while and said, "He should be happy to do it since you're the eldest disciple of the headmaster." Zhang Qingyue said with embarrassment, "But, Big Dipper, there's a difference in seniority. It's not easy to calculate." Peng smiled and said, "It's fine, it's fine. Only you and Zhang Xiaohua know about the Fist of the North Star. Zhang Xiaohua is not a disciple of the Misty School, so she can't teach Shui Tiantian. Moreover, based on what you said, this guy doesn't know how to teach at all. It's better if you teach him personally. Seniority is just a title. When you become the leader of the Misty School, even if Shui Yupeng is a generation older than you, what can she do? Don't worry, he's very happy. Furthermore, I only agreed to let my disciple take Tian as a disciple, but I never said that I would take her myself." Zhang Qingyue nodded and said, "Also, Big Gang Leader, Zhang Xiaohua also wants a copy of the Fist of the North Star. Are you going to give it to him or not?" Peng said with a smile, "Of course I did. I promised him that day. Besides, only you and I know about this. Who else knows about this secret? Neither you nor I will benefit from practicing this fist art. It would be useless for others to obtain it. However, tell Zhang Xiaohua that this fist art is only for him as a souvenir. He must not pass it on to others. Presumably, even if he wants to pass it on to others at such a young age, they may not be willing. When he grows up, our new generation of disciples will also have grown up. We won't have to worry about this fist art being passed on to others." The two discussed the details for a while more before Zhang Qingyue left the hall to find Shui Yupeng. Shui Yupeng was the deputy leader of the Misty School, but he was usually in the Luo Shui gang. He had just returned after meeting the monk Changgung at the martial arts exhibition when he was called back by Zhang Qingyue with a messenger pigeon. When Shui Yupeng returned, it was already a few days later. When he heard that Peng had allowed his son to become the disciple of the Misty School's headmaster, Shui Yupeng was extremely happy. Just as Peng had said, he did not have any dissatisfaction. When Zhang Qingyue finished his business and returned to the courtyard, he remembered that there was still a guy living next door who was eating and drinking for free. He asked someone to call Zhang Xiaohua over and asked, "Zhang Xiaohua, you have also lived here for a few days. How do you feel?" Zhang Xiaohua knew that Zhang Qingyue wanted to drive him away. He had not rested for the past few days. He was either practicing his fist art or refining his qi. The qi of heaven and earth in this small courtyard had been absorbed by him by nearly half. He did not dare to absorb any more. He was afraid that if something strange happened, he would not be able to explain it to Zhang Qingyue. So he said with a smile, "Thank you for your hospitality, Master Zhang. I have been living in this quiet place for the past few days. However, it seems that I can't leave Huanxi Mountain Villa. I have to go back and take a look." Zhang Qingyue said, "He Tianshu and the others have already returned to Huanxi Mountain Villa. You don't have to worry. The herbs have also come back to life. Everything has returned to normal." Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed and said, "That's great. I just don't know how my second brother is now." Zhang Qingyue thought for a moment and said, "Yesterday I saw Wen Wenhai. He seemed to be very satisfied with your second brother. He has already taught him the first level of the ethereal magic. He should have already been initiated." Zhang Xiaohua was even more delighted when he heard this and said, "That's great. Master Zhang, it seems that you know everything." Zhang Qingyue said, I am the eldest disciple of the headmaster of the sect. Of course, I have to know everything. Otherwise, I would not be worthy of the title of headmaster. Zhang Xiaohua asked with a smile, what about the fist art that the headmaster promised me? Zhang Qingyue snorted and looked as if he had expected this. He took out a brand new book from his arms and threw it to Zhang Xiaohua, saying, that's good. This is the fist art that you want. Zhang Xiaohua reached out and took it. Looking at the fist art that had nothing written on the cover, she carefully looked through the familiar moves one by one. Unexpectedly, she did not find any flaws. She could not help but smile and say, the Misty School is really amazing. There is not a trace of error in the copy of this fist art. Zhang Qingyue secretly cursed in his heart. Nonsense, this was not carefully copied by me. How could I dare to make a mistake? Seeing Zhang Xiaohua put the fist art into her arms, Zhang Qingyue said again, Zhang Xiaohua, although the headmaster promised to give you this fist art, please keep it carefully. Don't give it away casually and don't lose it. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua quickly said, don't worry, master's uncle Zhang. I know that you value this fist art very much. I promise you that I will never give this fist art to outsiders, nor will I teach it to others casually. Don't worry. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua was very understanding, Zhang Qingyue did not say much. Zhang Xiaohua left Zhang Qingyue's place and looked back at the small courtyard that looked ordinary on the outside but was extremely comfortable on the inside. She thought to herself that she did not know when she would have time to absorb the qi of heaven and earth again. Thinking about what Zhang Qingyue promised her, it seemed that when she had time, she would have to walk around the Misty School and look for places with dense qi of heaven and earth. However, this was a matter for the future. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua only wanted to see Zhang Xiaohu and discuss with him about returning to the Guizhuang house. When she thought of the Guizhuang house, Zhang Xiaohua could not hold back the fire in her heart. She wanted to take a step into the small courtyard where she could see the central room at a glance. When she arrived at Zhang Xiaohu's small courtyard, Zhang Xiaohu did not sit cross-legged and diligently practice his internal energy like Zhang Xiaohua had imagined. Instead, he took a small teapot and sat comfortably under a tree with his eyes closed, as if he had fallen asleep. Zhang Xiaohua asked curiously, second brother, I heard that you have just received Hero Wen's teachings. Why aren't you diligently practicing? You still have the leisure to listen to the wind here. When Zhang Xiaohu saw his younger brother enter, he quickly greeted him and poured a cup of water for him. He explained, the way of martial arts is to combine tension and relaxation. Although hard work is important in the practice of the qi of heaven and earth, the most important thing is comprehension. A moment of enlightenment is better than 100 days of hard work. This is the principle. In the past, when I was in the Lotus Escort Agency, I did not understand this and practiced to death. Now that I have heard Master's words, I know that there are many secrets to practicing martial arts. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but be shocked. Wasn't this the reason why she was still thinking about the Misty School's qi of heaven and earth? She was too concerned about the amount of internal energy and always wanted to eat until she became a big fatty. Now that her second brother's words had woken her up, it was better to relax a little. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, thank you second brother for the reminder. I understand. Zhang Xiaohu saw that his younger brother was so intelligent and was also happy. After receiving Wen Wenhai's teachings, he always wanted to tell Zhang Xiaohua what he had learned. The qi of heaven and earth was a secret of the Misty School that was not passed on to others. Of course, he himself could not say anything. However, these experiences of practicing martial arts were not included in this list. The two brothers talked about the recent situation with each other. Zhang Xiaohua asked, second brother, I have already asked for leave from sect leader O. He said that he wanted to go back to the Guizhuang house. He also agreed. Now that you have received Hero Wen's teachings, will you be able to go? If you can't, I will wait for you. Zhang Xiaohu said, didn't I just say that I have already learned the first level of the art of heaven and earth? Now I need to understand the qi of heaven and earth and slowly improve my state of mind. Only then can I practice better. Returning to the Guizhuang house can also be considered a form of practice. I will go ask master. If it is possible, we can choose a day to leave. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed and said, that is good. You go ask Hero Wen first. I will wait for your news. Zhang Xiaohu saw that his younger brother was so impatient and knew that he was extremely homesick. He tidied up a little and went out. When Zhang Xiaohua saw that her second brother had left, she was bored and could not help but try to draw qi into her body. Of course, the amount of qi in Zhang Xiaohu's courtyard was pitifully low. Zhang Xiaohua gave up after drawing in a few strands. Just like a person who has eaten delicacies from the mountains and seas, if you let him eat chaff again, no matter how much he eats, he will not feel good. After a long time, Zhang Xiaohu came back with a straight face. Zhang Xiaohua saw that and felt that something was wrong. She asked, second brother, what is it? Is it because Hero Wen doesn't agree? Zhang Xiaohu said dejectedly, yes, master said that I have only just learned this internal energy. How can I leave master's guidance so casually? Zhang Xiaohua was also disheartened. She sat down dejectedly and said, sigh, then what should we do? I really want to go back and take a look. Zhang Xiaohu said, yes, we can't go back now. However, after 2 or 3 days, we can. Zhang Xiaohua said, 2 or 3 days is such a long time. At this point, she suddenly realized something and said with a smile, second brother, you are coaxing me. It has only been 2 or 3 days. Why do you look so sad? Chapter 218. At this time, Zhang Xiaohu's face immediately changed into a happy one. He said, yes, I'm eager to go home, but I have to stay here for a few more days. My heart is itching just thinking about it. Zhang Xiaohua said in all seriousness, this kind of mentality is not conducive to the cultivation of the inner force cultivation method. Second brother, didn't you just say that haste is not the end of the road? Now that we haven't seen each other for a while, you've become impetuous again. Zhang Xiaohu opened his eyes slightly and looked at Zhang Xiaohua in front of him. He inadvertently showed a smile and said, I know. As the ancient saying goes, the onlooker sees the game clearly, but the person involved is confused. Don't laugh at me. It's better to practice more. Zhang Xiaohua did not refute and nodded. That's right. The two of them made preparations to go home again, and then they parted. Zhang Xiaohua went out of Zhang Xiaohu's small courtyard. The misty school had returned to tranquility at this time. Perhaps Peng's order was effective, and the government decrees were smooth. Perhaps it was because after these days, the forbidden area did not cause trouble again, and the disciples were less in awe. In short, it was no different from the previous misty school. There was no panic and mystery like last time. Returning to Huanxi Mountain Villa again, Zhang Xiaohua was a little emotional. Since the day she was taken to the Misty School to participate in the martial arts exhibition, she had hardly stayed in Huanxi Mountain Villa. During this period of time, the things that happened were really complicated. In a few days, she would have to go back to Guizhuang House, and she would have to say goodbye to the villa again. The first thing Zhang Xiaohua did after entering the villa was to go to the medicine field. Sure enough, as she expected, most of the medicinal herbs that were almost dead before had survived. Moreover, the medicine field was well maintained, and no weeds grew. Presumably, He Tianshu and Nye Xiao had been worried about it these days. When she looked up again, the small straw shed she had painstakingly built was gone. They must have found it an eyesore. However, it did not matter. Not to mention that she was not in the villa for the time being. Even if she came back in the future, she would not dare to snatch food from the mouth of the grass again. When she saw that the medicine field was still bare without sprouts, Zhang Xiaohua did not feel as helpless as before. Anyway, she already knew the reason why this kind of seeds could not germinate. She only needed to find a way to give these seeds enough pneuma. However, even the pneuma gathered by practicing heavenly thunder was not enough. For the time being, Zhang Xiaohua still could not think of a good way. On the way back to the small courtyard, Zhang Xiaohua unexpectedly met Ma Jing and Lu Er again. Ma Jing was still thin like a hemp stick, but Lu Er was getting fatter. Presumably, he had already made up for the loss of leaving the villa during this period. When Zhang Xiaohua saw Ma Jing from afar, she smiled and cupped her hands to salute him. Since she had been with He Tianshu and others, she had not talked to Ma Jing for a long time. Although she was still afraid of his smelly hands, it should be okay to talk from afar. However, Ma Jing was not as arrogant as she imagined. Instead, he trotted over from afar. Even Lu Er, who was behind him, was caught off guard and left far behind. When he got closer, Ma Jing rushed to salute her and said, "Little brother Zhang, long time no see. How are you now?" When Zhang Xiaohua heard this, she was stunned. She looked up and down, left and right. Was this still Ma Jing? She asked doubtfully, "Brother Ma, what are you doing?" Ma Jing waved his hand and said, "Don't call me Brother Ma. I'm just a few years older than you. Just call me Ma Jing. Little brother Zhang, I know you are a talent. When you first moved in, I knew it. Really, in the future, I must leave a plaque in my hut that says Zhang Xiaohua sleeps here. When you become famous in Jianghu, you can let people visit. Every time, it will be 1 copper coin. What do you think? By the way, why don't you leave me a calligraphy? I heard that you can write now. You are much better than me, who can't open my eyes." After that, he looked excited and wanted to hold Zhang Xiaohua's hands. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua did not dare to let him come close. She quickly cupped her hands and said, "Brother Ma, I still have things to do. You can do as you see fit. I'll go first." After that, she used the levitation skill and left quickly. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's magical lightness skill, Ma Jing was even more admiring. He said, "Tsk, you are really not an ordinary person. When you first came, you were a country boy who knew nothing. Looking at your kung fu, no wonder even the old bald donkey of the Dalan temple was no match for you. Alas, comparisons are odious. Why doesn't He Tianshu like me, a martial arts genius?" After that, he naturally put his fingers under his nose and sniffed. He called Lu Er, who had just caught up, and they went to do things together. Zhang Xiaohua walked and thought, why did Ma Jing become so distant? However, just now, I wanted to say something to him. But when I opened my mouth, I didn't know what to say. This guy used to be hateful and bullied me repeatedly. But now, when I want to punish him, I don't have such thoughts. It's really strange. In fact, it was simple. Although Zhang Xiaohua and Ma Jing lived in the same courtyard, they were in 2 different worlds. How could they have the same topic? At this time, it was easy for Zhang Xiaohua to teach Ma Jing a lesson. But he was not a person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. How could he have the leisure to find trouble with him? What's more, Zhang Xiaohua showed great power in the martial arts exhibition. Although the Misty School would not publicize this kind of thing, it was not a secret. It was bound to be spread in Jianghu. Huanqi Villa was so close that it was natural that no one knew about it. Maybe people in Jianghu would not care about it. It was just a competition between low-level disciples in Jianghu. But for servants like Ma Jing, it was a big deal. When they thought about how they bullied Zhang Xiaohua when he first came to Huanqi Villa, they were all frightened. If Zhang Xiaohua brought up old scores and came to find trouble, how could they be his opponent? Therefore, when Ma Jing saw Zhang Xiaohua, he immediately went to curry favor with him. On the one hand, he wanted to use the reason that he was familiar with Zhang Xiaohua to get close to him. On the other hand, he wanted to let Zhang Xiaohua calm down and not hate his previous mistakes. Zhang Xiaohua gradually understood Ma Jing's intention as he walked. He could not help laughing secretly. Now he was a person who could talk directly with Grand Gang leader O and the disciple of sect leader Zhang. How could he care about these servants? When he was thinking, he saw the arched door in front of him. He could not help but be shocked. How could he walk so fast today? At this time, Zhang Xiaohua found that he actually used the levitation skill, which was lightness skill all the way. Zhang Xiaohua was happy. He could barely float in the air before he attracted thunder. These days, he did not practice lightness skill, but he could improve so much. It seemed that the levitation skill should be related to internal force. Seeing that it was still early, Zhang Xiaohua did not enter the small courtyard. He turned his head and used lightness skill to rush into the small forest. After entering the forest, Zhang Xiaohua did not continue to practice lightness skill. Instead, he sat cross-legged and checked the qi in his meridians. After he had a good idea, he then silently chanted the levitation skill of ethereal steps. He guided the qi to flow in his meridians and his body slowly floated up. Following that, Zhang Xiaohua followed the lightness skill recorded in the ethereal steps and he Tianqu's lightness skill. He leaped up and down in the forest, running around like a bullet. After practicing for a while, Zhang Xiaohua was in a good mood. Although he had just started to use lightness skill and there was a limit to the height he could reach, he could already use it. In the future, he would not need to walk step by step. Presumably, with the improvement of his skills, it would only be a matter of time before he could reach a higher realm. After his mood calmed down, Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged again and checked his qi. This check was not important. The qi that was as thick as a cotton thread had shrunk. Zhang Xiaohua's heart ached. It was not easy for him to absorb some qi of heaven and earth. He had wasted a lot of it just by going up and down. How would he dare to use it in the future? This lightness skill was also a waste of internal energy. Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua did not immediately get up. Instead, he silently circulated the Heart Sutra cultivation method and circulated the qi in his meridians. After a careful check, Zhang Xiaohua heaved a sigh of relief. The shrunken qi had already recovered a little. Fortunately, even if there was no qi of heaven and earth to absorb, he could still recover by circulating his qi. Otherwise, Zhang Xiaohua would not dare to use lightness skill. Following that, Zhang Xiaohua continued to practice in the forest. He gradually realized that if he simply floated a little in the air and used the ethereal steps lightness skill to move forward, the consumption of qi would be the least. If he floated for a long period of time and did not use lightness skill, the consumption of qi would be a lot. And what consumed the most qi was to float for a long period of time. When he floated a little higher, he would simply use his qi to float forward. He would not use ethereal steps or borrow strength from external objects. However, Zhang Xiaohua had some doubts. Was this still lightness skill? After finishing his practice, Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged in the forest and meditated for a long time before returning to the small courtyard. The scene in the small courtyard was the same as when Zhang Xiaohua first arrived. Zhang Xiaohua first tidied up his little house. Previously, he had only finished half of it when he went to the herb farm. The next day, he was still thinking about the herb farm and forgot about it. If he did not tidy it up this time, who knew when the next time would be? When everything was in order, Zhang Xiaohua pushed open the door and came to He Tianqu's door. Gently knocking on the door, He Tianqu's familiar voice sounded, "Who is it? Come in." Seeing that it was Zhang Xiaohua who came in, He Tianqu's smiled and said, "Zhang Xiaohua, you have finally shown yourself. Sigh, you are now a mysterious person." Zhang Xiaohua chuckled and said, "Team leader He, please don't laugh at me. It's just that big sect leader is looking for me for some matters. Won't I be back once I'm done? Where else can I go?" He Tianqu's shook his head and said, "To be able to see big sect leader from time to time and work for big sect leader is the wish of all the disciples in our Misty School. For someone like you, who is not even a disciple of our Misty School, to be able to gain big sect leader's favor, it really makes us envious." Envious? Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly.